Hello, and welcome to episode 430 of the Unauthorized History of the Pacific War podcast. My name is Seth Perrin, historian and deputy director of the Mississippi Armed Forces Museum. And with me, as always, is my esteemed co-host, retired Navy Captain Bill Tody, former skipper of the fast attack submarine USS Indianapolis, Commodore of Submarine Squadron 3 in Pearl Harbor, and many others. How are you on this December the 17th, Bill?
Yeah, things are moving forward, Seth. Looking forward to this distraction, as it were.
As it were, as it were. As if you're watching or if you're listening, you can probably tell that we have the third member of our crew with us, our fantastic friend and outstanding historian, Jon Parshall. How are you in the great state of Minnesota, John?
I am just peachy keen and looking forward to this with bated breath.
This is going to be fun. And again, if you're looking at us, you can tell that a fourth member of our crew is with us. He was with us for two Q&A sessions last season. He's going to be with us for these next series of Q&A sessions this season, and will be with us when we do CBI. This is my good buddy, Shawn Bergstrom. Shawn, just to reintroduce him, is a retired United States Army major, where in his military career, he served as a U.S. cavalry officer with over a decade of service, with stops in the 1st Cav Division, 7th U.S. Cav Squadron, U.S. Armor School, a deployment in the Middle East with the 153rd Cav Squadron, before finishing his career as a military science instructor at FSU. And he is quite literally my oldest friend. We've known each other since we were 5 years old.
Wow.
How are you, Shawn?
I'm good. Everything's beautiful here in the Panhandle in Pensacola Beach, Florida.
There we go. All right. So, as I alluded to, this is our season. What the hell are we? 4 Q&A sessions. This is season 4 Q&A sessions. This is the first one we're going to do of it. 3 for sure. So if you notice right now, we all look pretty much like we generally do. I'm in my office, John's in his office, Bill's in his office, Shawn's in his apartment. We're all looking like we do. Now, this is the first episode of the series of 3, as I said, and we're doing this at our normal recording time. But the next 2 that we're going to do, we're going to record them later this week, Friday to be exact. And I'm going to be doing it at my house. And why am I going to be doing it at my house, John?
Because you need an adult beverage in your hand, my dude. And so do I.
Exactly.
Because, this week is shaping up to be kind of hellacious, moving my daughter around. And so, by the time we get to Friday, it is going to be time to kick back, do multiple Q&A sessions with a brew in hand.
Indeed.
Yes.
Indeed. It will be fun. So if you like this one, buckle up for the next 2.
Exactly.
Because I think the first one, or technically the second one that we do, will probably be pretty good till about halfway through. And then we might start to get a little silly. And then the next one, God knows. Lord help us all. So. But also, before we get into the Q&A, we do need to make an announcement. The 3 of us, Bill, John, and myself, we're going to be at a conference. John, you want to tackle that?
Yeah, we are going to be at the Western Naval History Association's annual conference out in San Diego on February 1st and 2nd. We're going to be appearing there courtesy of the U.S. Naval Academy's Alumni Association, which is sponsoring that event, and we are very grateful to them for doing that. So we're going to be doing actually something fairly similar to this, another Q&A session for the people who are on that at that conference physically and also virtually. And so you can actually sign up to go and attend that in person, or
I'll put the link down here. So
put the link down there. It's nha.org, I believe it is, or is it com? I can't remember. It's one of the two. Anyway, that is the link for the association, and it's run by a great group of people. Vince O'Hara is one of the bigwigs there, preeminent naval historian in the Mediterranean space, I would say. Also Sam Tangretti. So we're looking forward to appearing there, and I'm looking forward to seeing the USS Midway for the first time. Never been there, so good times.
Good ship. And Bill, you're going to be doing 2 sessions.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to be talking about the sinking of the USS Scorpion that morning, and then in the
Saturday morning, right?
We're going to be doing our session together. And Sam, Seth, as it pertains to the recording on Friday, when we first conceived of this podcast, we said we wanted to. Our shtick was going to be two dudes, in this case, four dudes, sitting in a bar talking about World War II Pacific War history. And we won't be sitting in a bar on Friday, but as close as we can get virtually, won't we?
True.
Yep.
But we will be sitting in a bar in February at
We will
some
in
point,
February.
I'm sure.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yes, indeed.
Come
All
to
right.
San Diego, folks.
Yep. Mark your calendars.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Buy tickets. Buy early, buy often. All right.
That's right.
On with the show. Shawn, you've got the helm. Rock and roll.
Bill, do I have does the cavalry have the con?
Yeah, you have the con, Shawn.
I thought you'd
Not
give me
the
some
deck,
crap.
dude.
I thought you'd give me some crap about that game last weekend, Bill.
Yeah, you crap, you would.
Oh,
Go
Yeah.
Navy.
Go Navy.
I text Bill Saturday and congratulated
You
him.
did.
So
Yeah, thank you for that. It was
it
very,
was a good,
very
good
cool.
game.
So on that point, before you get off, I was in enemy territories. Me and one other Naval Academy grad with about 40 West Pointers.
Ooh.
And
goodness.
boy, they were well behaved. This is the one.
That's what I've always heard, that they're
Navy
very,
game. It's
very
always
convivial.
very cordial, very
Yep.
civilized. They
yes.
weren't quite drinking tea. They had adult beverages, but
Mhm.
they congratulated me. I will say that the joke with the Academy graduates is you always want to sing second because the victor sings their alma mater last.
Last, right.
When they were singing first, ain't nobody singing. I couldn't hear a peep from those dudes, but I sang loud, raucously with this horrible voice. So I was happy.
Excellent.
Yeah.
All
Well,
right, Shawn, bring it.
all right.
Let's
So
do this.
this is what I did. So we had about 500 questions, under 500 questions come in. As always, I have gone through every single one of them multiple times. Again, always like to lead off with appreciation. I had a lot of great stories, personal stories, World War II stories, family stories. We all really appreciate that. But as Bill and Seth has alluded to in the asking for questions, if you keep it short and smaller, you're going to get front loaded. So the first questions we're going to be hitting are going to be smaller, to the point, great questions. But my preseason question I'm going to give for my boy John. John, a lot of people inquired about you. You are a big hit on the unauthorized history. Last time I was able to kind of just ask the guys, hey, give us a little background on yourself, but more importantly, what drove you into writing your books and becoming this World War II aficionado?
Well, the short answer to that is it's been sort of a long journey. The gateway drug for me, actually, I've been interested in naval stuff ever since I can remember. Even when I was like 3 or 4, I just thought ships were fascinating. And I remember walking to first grade past a Navy recruiting poster that was right by the football stadium for Indiana State University. I grew up in Terre Haute, Indiana, and just thought it was cool. My dad was a college English prof, and he used to bring home 16 millimeter reel to reels of the Victory at Sea series because he had this Navy crazy kid, and he would show them on the wall of our living room. He had made a deal with the local Naval Reserve Center, and he got them through them. Anyway, so I just thought those were cool. And then when I got to 5th grade, I built a model kit of the heavy cruiser Haguro. And that was sort of like, oh my God, this is the coolest ship I've ever seen in my life. And that kind of set me on the path towards the Japanese Navy. So I was totally into the IJN all the way up to high school. Gave away all those models when I went away to college. It kind of all lay dormant until I was 30 years old, and we had lived in Japan right after we got married. Came back here. I'm working on my MBA. I'm bored as hell. And I ended up writing a letter to a guy named David Evans, who wrote a book on the Japanese Navy. It was a series of interviews of their naval officers. We've used it on this program. And I just thought it was cool. I wrote him a letter. He and I became pen pals. I ended up doing the illustrations for his and Mark Peaty's book Kaigun. That then led to me doing even more work on Mark Peaty's Sunburst. Unfortunately, after David passed from cancer, that was sort of my apprenticeship. And then when Tony and I had this opportunity to write this book on the Battle of Midway, and starting in 1999, it kind of fell in our laps, and I was like, I've just gotten done, doing the majority of the work on Mark Petey's book. I've done my apprenticeship. I am arrogant enough to think that I can actually write a book. And 6 years later, there was Shattered Sword. So that's the nutshell answer. It's been kind of circuitous.
Cool.
Naval history has always been my hobby. Up until 3 years ago, it was just my hobby that paid. I was an IT guy, but I've been very, very fortunate to do work in this space, and I'm extremely grateful for having had that opportunity. So that's it.
Awesome.
Yeah.
It's funny. Seth and I used to watch those Victory at Seas. We used to go
Oh
rent
my
them
God.
and build
So
build
cool.
models together. Those were great.
Yeah.
Great shows.
Yeah.
All right, so there we go. The first question, and it's crazy. I was telling Seth I had put this as the first question to ask you, all three of you, and it's the last question I looked at, or basically the same question. So just kind of bear with me because it's two questions in one. Stan says, "What story from a veteran has stuck with you the most?" And Curtis says, "Fellows, good day to you. My question is primarily for Seth, but Seth, for oral histories you've done throughout the years, are there any particular ones that stand out years later? Ones that were most memorable, emotional? Bill, John, Shawn, if you have similar stories, please share. Thank you for all you guys do in this podcast and expanding my knowledge of the Pacific War tenfold." That's from Curtis from Glen Carbon, Illinois. So guys, what do you got?
I know Curtis. Hi, Curtis. Hung out with you, Curtis. Hung out with you in New Orleans. Anyhow, geez, Louise.
So many for you. You've interviewed hundreds of vets.
Thousands.
Thousands.
The ones there are several that are like memorable. They're all memorable for varying reasons. The ones that stick with me the most are the guys that I kept in touch with after I interviewed them, or even before and then after. And when I say that these guys were my friends, I'm not just saying that. I'm being honest. I still keep in touch with some of their family members now that they're deceased. So I mean, they were quite honestly friends. But a lot of the guys that were at Midway, Dusty Cleese, Don Hoff, especially Don Hoff. A lot of the guys that were at Guadalcanal, Frank Pomeroy, those guys, and Sid Phillips, Dr. Sid. Dr. Sid lived in Mobile. We hung out a lot at his house. Those guys are just fantastic. They were fantastic human beings, and they were true, honest to God friends. And those are the ones that and not just them. There's Sweet Veteza, Flash Gordon, there's Dutch Van Kirk. There's a bunch of guys that I knew for a very, very long time and I was very close with. So I couldn't really say that there was anybody that was more memorable than the others, because and I'm not trying to be corny, but I try to remember them all. But I mean, in all honesty, the ones that I stayed in touch with after I interviewed them are the ones that I think about almost daily.
Yeah.
And I'm asked all the time, what was the best oral history you did? And believe it or not, it was not a Pacific Theater oral history. The best oral history I ever did was with Dr. Lyle J. Bauk, who was the platoon leader for the intelligence and reconnaissance platoon of the 99th Infantry Division at Lanzarote during the Bulge. I interviewed him in his house. I was one of the few people that ever did. And I remember it was snowing and we were talking about the Bulge, and you could see this, it was just spooky kind of thing. And I remember him going into his house and he's like, "Well, I'm only going to talk for like 45 minutes. Whatever you want to do, Dr. Bauk." And we sat down, and I don't know, 6 hours later,
wow,
we were done. And I think I might have said, 10 words, because that dude just unloaded everything, not just the Bulge, but like his time in Hammelburg and everything else. Incredible dude. But there's too many to count. But Pacific guys, Sweet Veteza and Don Hoff, those are my two buddies. I stayed in touch with them and literally until they passed away.
John?
I've known far fewer. I've always been an operational level guy, and so I've gotten into far fewer of the individual accounts. I will tell you the two that really stuck with me. First of all, just meeting Harry Ferrier, who was, one of the two surviving crewmen from VT-8 detachment at the Battle of Midway, and him having the baseball cap with the 7.7 millimeter machine gun hole drilled through the cap that creased his head, that knocked him cold. Him telling me, he was 17 when he went out on that mission. And he said, we went out on that mission. We were incredibly impressed with this airplane. We thought we were going to do great things. He ends up coming back covered in the blood of the gunner who'd been killed above him. The plane shot to pieces, no hits recorded. And he was like, I was a completely different human being at the end of that. The other one that sticks with me is not really so much a veteran account, but an anonymous Russian longshoreman from Murmansk, and we may have covered this one too. We have a World War II history roundtable here in the Twin Cities. We had a gathering where we had a whole bunch of Russian vets, because there's a big Russian community here in the Twin Cities. This guy told a story. He was a stevedore in Murmansk. American ship comes into harbor, starts unloading stuff. This American sailor gets off, opens up a crate of something, pulls out a can of something, hands it to this Russian guy. And he's like, no, I can't take this. American opens it up, takes his penknife, cuts a little hunk of whatever it is off and eats it to show this Russian guy, this is not poison, here, take this. It's a can of Spam, right? And this Russian guy, he says, was the most delicious thing I've ever eaten. And I knew then that we would not starve. And he was serious. So that one really, really struck me. I've always forgotten that story, or remember that story. Bill.
Well, we're going to do an episode on the Indianapolis. So everybody expects me to talk about the guys in the water, and I heard over 100 of those stories personally. Didn't record them, but many of them are recorded. And a friend of mine has those videos of those recordings and stories. But one that sticks with me of the guys in the water aren't the sharks. We'll talk about that when we do the episode. It's actually the murder or murderers, right? With the sailors, bosun's mates generally have a marlin spike and a knife on their belt, cutting lines and things like that. And when they went into the water, some of them had them, and there were murderers in the water. And so when the guys started going psycho from dehydration after a couple of days. So obviously those stick with me. There's so many of those stories. We got to save that for a separate episode. But the one, I got to say, the one that changed my life was meeting Dick O'Kane at the Academy. It was 1977. I guess I was a second class or third class, rising second class. And talking about the ship getting sunk out from under him, right? That was harrowing, frightening, and inspiring all at once. And of course, I ended up going submarines largely because of it. So I have to say that's, for a formative standpoint, that's absolutely the most important World War II story I ever heard.
Yeah.
Cool. Seth doesn't know this story, but about me, I went to they had one of the premieres for Saving Private Ryan in New Orleans, and my dad got us tickets. So I watched Saving Private Ryan with basically theater full of Omaha veterans.
Wow.
Pretty crazy, pretty moving.
Yeah.
All right. Number 2, Rabaul and Truk were the two big bad boogeymen bases for the Japanese. Which one was the bigger and badder of the two, and why? Compare and contrast. Thanks. Really dig the show, John in Ohio.
That's a great question.
It is.
That's a great question.
I guess it depends on the time of the war, right?
Yeah. Wow.
How about from the Army division standpoint?
Yeah, it's got to be Rabaul.
Rabaul for sure.
Yeah,
I mean, there's far more servicemen in Rabaul. I think you would have to say that Rabaul is the more important base in terms of just the combat down in the Solomons and whatnot.
And from the turning point standpoint?
Yeah, Rabaul's kind of my pick. But Truk, just, they did have, fuel tanks and, facilities there and whatnot. And it really just from a mystery standpoint, Truk it really was the big bad boogeyman up until we smashed it.
Yeah,
what do you think?
Tiger. I'm going to say Rabaul. I'm going to say Rabaul because of the Guadalcanal campaign.
Yeah.
Most, not all, but most of your air raids be they,
Mhm.
Army or even Navy for that matter, are coming out of Rabaul or in that
Yeah.
general area. A lot of, as you know, a lot of the Japanese ships that are coming down to shell Henderson Field are at the very least are making a stopover at Rabaul,
Yeah.
or they're coming out of Rabaul to come there. And then, I mean, good gravy. Look at all the resources that we put in reducing Rabaul after Guadalcanal.
Yeah. Right.
All the way from really January 43 until 44. Not
Yeah.
just us, the Aussies and everybody else. We're putting just tens of thousands of men, into reducing that bastion.
Yeah.
My vote is Rabaul.
Yeah.
What about you, Bill?
Yeah, I mean, I hinted at my answer with
Oh,
my
I'm sorry.
question. And so, yeah, it was, I think it was Rabaul. I think Truk turned out to be kind of a phantom ghost. It was not a pretend threat. It was a real threat, but it was the 20-foot giant as far as we're concerned. And it turned out not to be so much. And Rabaul
Yeah.
was real, though. Anyway, that's my opinion.
Cool.
Agreed.
All right. Good evening, gentlemen. What was the best divisional level Army leadership team in the Pacific?
Divisional level.
Army, not Marine Corps, not
Army, not Marine.
AD
Army. This is
Bruce, 77th
Bruce.
ID.
Yep.
This is from Zell R.
Yeah.
AD Bruce all the way, man.
Yeah. I maybe first Cav, but that is a later kind of. I wish we had McManus. Yeah, but
Yeah,
You
he
can't
would
say
have an
that. We were
opinion.
saying John last time. You can't.
That's
We have
all.
7 people on the next Q&A.
Yeah, I hear you. No, but I have to say 77th ID is just a great division. So
I would agree. Hold on, I'm doing some real-time history right now because I just forgot the guy's name.
that's how we roll.
It is Joseph Swing, 11th Airborne Division.
Mm-mm-mm.
He was a pretty bad dude.
I was gonna, yeah.
Now, you did say leadership team and not just leader, right? Because
Yeah, I wanted to go with,
were-
let's go with divisional commander. I think that makes
Okay.
it a little bit smoother transitioned question. How about Corlett with the 7th?
Corlett's a good dude. Corlett, in my opinion, he does a great job with 7th ID, but he's not there very long because
Was
he
he
gets
with
pulled
them?
out.
Was he with them in the Aleutians, or did he
Yes.
come later?
Yeah,
Yes, he was.
He was with them in the Aleutians. He was with them on Kwajalein, and then after Kwajalein, he gets yanked off to the ETO.
To be a
I
corps
believe he-
corps
yeah,
commander.
Corps
He's a
commander
corps
in the
commander.
ETO, exactly. Yeah, so yeah, he was great, but he wasn't there very damn long. But
Mhm.
in terms of, I agree with you, John, 100%. AD Bruce all the way, and I'd say Joseph Swing would be number 2 because he was cock of the walk. Joseph Swing was. He was a bad dude.
Cool. All right. All right, Seth and Bill, I'm a huge fan of the podcast. You both do a fantastic job. I'm from New Zealand, and my question is, what involvement, however minimal, did the Kiwis have in the Pacific campaign? Keep up the great work, Joe from New Zealand.
There's a lot of Kiwi air power on Guadalcanal.
Tons.
Yeah, so you don't see a lot of Kiwi ground troops, obviously. Their main contribution in terms of ground power, I would argue, is Second New Zealand Division, that of course is a fantastic division in the Middle East and is an important component first in Auchinleck and then Montgomery's army. Arguably, between in ninth Australian get pulled out. Second New Zealand is there for quite a while. That's a great division. But in the Pacific, you see a lot of Kiwi air power. There were Kiwi air squadrons operating out of Cactus that were part of the Cactus Air Force, and they continue to contribute up through the entirety of the New Guinea campaign. So
Right. I remember my friend Cam Newton, CB, was supporting, I should say, some Kiwi infantry in the Solomons. Can't remember what island it was, New Britain, maybe. I forget it. It's on the episode that I recorded with Cam, but he had high praise for the Kiwis. We won't talk about the shipping strike, though, will we? The transshipment.
things happen. But I think that's an opportunity to actually to put in a plug just in general for our Australian and New Zealand allies, that they did yeoman's work on a very limited population. But, Australia supplied tons of food. They, I think, are the only country that was net positive in terms of lend-lease aid, that we actually ended up owing Australia money at the end of the war because of all of the food and basic clothing, blankets, that kind of stuff that had been churned out by the Australians during the war. We had fabulous allies, and we should not forget them.
A lot of our guys on New Guinea in 42 are eating Australian mutton because we couldn't get the damn food over there.
For sure.
Those countries are punching way above their weight class. That's
for sure.
True.
Yep.
And great allies to this day. So fantastic.
Yeah, when we go to the Guadalcanal commemoration ceremony in August, there are always representatives from the Australian and the New Zealand militaries there because they're very important in the Solomons to this day.
Although I still struggle to tell the difference between the accents. Fush and chops. Go ahead.
Was MacArthur ever considered for a 6-star? Mike H wants to know.
Go ahead, Bill.
Go ahead, Bill. This is specifically for you.
Muttering under my breath. Yeah, the only 6-star. I'm pretty sure this is still true. You would know. Shawn is George Washington.
I think he's
Congress
considered the sole 6-star person. Like
he's it.
Right.
So if the question is MacArthur up to the level of Washington? The answer is yes, in MacArthur's mind. No,
and only there.
In any sane person's mind. I'll resist the temptation to pile on and leave it at that.
Thanks, Bill. We appreciate that, buddy.
Throttle back.
All right. I love the show. After watching the Okinawa episode, when you guys spoke of Desmond Doss and what he went through about not wanting to carry a weapon, I always thought that medics in World War II weren't allowed to carry weapons. Did medics carry weapons in the Pacific and not Europe? Thanks again for such a great show. This is from Chris M.
Yes. Next. No, they did. In all honesty, no. Medics and corpsmen, they weren't. Go ahead, Bill.
No, they are. That's right. The only ones who were not carrying weapons were the chaplains.
Exactly.
Everybody had a weapon.
Objectors, but right. Corpsmen carried. They might only carry a 45, but I mean, it still goes pow when you pull the trigger. And U.S. Army medics in the Pacific most certainly did carry fire. I'm not saying all of them did, but they were issued firearms and they were available if they wanted to carry them. And I mean, most of these guys did because the Japanese did not care.
No.
That Red Cross was a target.
It was.
Yeah.
I think the confusion lies when it's your training, that's the whole point of the movie, that everybody's training with a weapon. But in that movie, he didn't even want to train with the weapon, right? I think that's the stick on that. Yeah. This is a good question from Victor. Victor wants to know, do you think the Allies could have won the battle for Guadalcanal if the Japanese had successfully seized Port Moresby after the Battle of Coral Sea, instead of trying to take Port Moresby by land over the Owen Stanley Range?
Great question. I've vented spleen on the idiocy of trying to seize Port Moresby. I think it's a complete strategic cul-de-sac, and they couldn't have kept it in supply anyway. And so, if you look at, that's a fascinating question. If they pump in South Seas Force, which is 2 regiments, 41st and 144th, they landed those troops at the end of July. If they had been available for, Kawaguchi's counterattack or something like that in September, man, that could be a real game changer. I guess I would say, from a hypothetical standpoint, that makes things really interesting and could absolutely have tipped the balance. What do you guys think?
I would agree with that. I think as far as I don't know so much about the naval aspect of it, because we were already on the ropes as it was. But I think in the ground campaign, if you can throw another division or 2, or even hell, like you were saying, even a regiment or 2
regiments, that's a lot.
I mean, just look at how close, and of course Dave Holland's like, talk, but Dave ain't here. but I mean, look how close they were at Edson's Ridge, man. I mean, they were a frog's hair away from breaking through and doing their thing. And then to Henderson Field too, October, that was touch and go. I mean, it was not, this whole John Basilone ass whipping that we always think. They got close. not as close as Ensign's Ridge, but they got close. So,
and this is another one of those examples of, just a few days either way, because the fact that the Japanese landed South Seas Force a week before we end up piling into Guadalcanal, and now they're sort of wrong-footed unintentionally, and crap, now we've got troops down here that we could have used over there, but we moved here a little too soon. And the analog I would draw there is the fact that the Russians launched their counterattack outside Moscow on December 5th, and the Japanese, who are banking on the fact that the Germans are going to win the war in the East, get presented with that fait accompli while they still have their fleet at sea and about to attack Pearl Harbor 2 days later. What would have happened if the Japanese had had a little more warning time to see what's happening in the snows outside of Moscow? Maybe they go, maybe going to war with the U.S. is not such a smooth move at this point. Anyway.
Yeah, so Seth, I thought you were going to break into the Cheech and Chong routine. Dave ain't here. This is Dave. Did I get any calls?
I actually thought about that.
You didn't do that. John, you have forgotten more about this phase of the campaign than I'll ever know. The only nuance I could add is that, holy cow, would that mean that many they have to resupply that many more troops?
Great point.
The quicker that they're going to starve to death?
Great point.
I don't know that they could have supported those troops.
Traditional regiments.
Well, they couldn't support the guys they had, and they couldn't support the damn guys they had on New Guinea anyway.
That's what I'm saying. So
no, you're 100% right.
They might have got the troops there, but then just have them starve. But go ahead.
Although push back to that pushback, as far as New Guinea is concerned, the logistics in New Guinea really don't fall apart for the Japanese until the tail end of the campaign.
Okay.
And they actually only fall apart for the group that is pushed forward of Kokoda. So, there's nuance there too. Anyway, but super good point that, 2 extra regiments on Guadalcanal. Where's that supply coming from? Hell if I know. Anyway.
But do you need the supply if you punch through the lines and wipe the Marines out?
Yeah, okay, fair.
Might make it easier.
Then you're eating pay rations, right?
As I used to say when I was a mathematician, it's a non-linear problem. Go ahead.
All right. Alan from Salisbury, England says, great show, boys. My question is, who, in your opinion, was the best flag rank officer on both the American and Japanese side? Keep the great episodes coming.
Well, we already know the answer there.
Yeah, I'll start there. But by the way, I love Salisbury, England. I have spent good quality time with the British Army there and photographed Stonehenge all by myself. I got permission to photograph it by myself. So thanks for the question. Dudes, is there any debate? Nimitz?
Nimitz.
Yeah, it's got to be Nimitz.
Nimitz.
Yeah.
All right.
Well, we didn't do the IJN though. Okay.
Do
the IJN.
I'm going to say Ozawa.
I'm a big Ozawa fan myself. Yeah.
Yep.
All right.
Boom.
Hello, love your channel so much. It's an utter joy listening to you. Question: what characteristics made the Fletcher class destroyer the destroyer for the U.S. Navy during the war? What did the Fletcher lack, which influenced future designs and needs for the Navy? Thank you. This is from James F. from Parkersburg, Pennsylvania.
The thing that made it the destroyer was 248 of them.
Yeah, I was going to say production.
How many we built of those puppies? What a great ship. I mean, my God, just a great ship. The thing it was lacking, I guess, was when you look at the distribution of turrets, putting them all in single mounts really is a little bit of a waste of displacement there. But the problem that you end up getting with the follow-on Sumners is by putting 2 twin turrets up front of that thing, they did have a tendency to really bury their bows. They were not as good sea boats as the Fletchers were, from my understanding. I kind of wonder if a more efficient arrangement of the Sumner's turrets might have been more akin to what you see in the Japanese, where you've got 1 twin forward, 2 twins aft. But anyway.
I would say what made the Fletcher so good, I was going to say, was production.
Yeah.
The sheer, it's like the Cleveland class light cruisers, you just pump them out all day long. But I mean, they were good boats. I mean, hell, there's a couple still floating around here, not the least of which is in Baton Rouge, but it's Baton Rouge. But they were utilitarian. I mean, they did freaking everything, and they did everything well. There's not like one thing that they did better than the others. They were just good at everything they did. As far as the Sumners, they had more guns. We just did 2 episodes on radar pickets, and we talked about two
Yep.
Sumner class ships, Hadley and Laffey, and they just had more. They had more barrels, and of course, Evans was a Fletcher class, and she gave a great account of herself. But I think the Sumners they just had more firepower, and because like we said, they were built. Yeah, they served in the Atlantic, obviously, but they were really built for the Pacific theater.
The only thing they couldn't do well is they weren't very good submarines. They could only submerge once. But they did everything else well.
Right.
All right, moving on. Was there ever any thought given to using a 16-inch gun for long-range AA fire? Proximity fused round could possibly take out several aircraft in formation. Reach out and touch an entire squadron with a salvo. Thank you, Tom W.
Like the Yamato?
Yeah, I'm gonna jump on that, and then I'm gonna let you guys go. So first of all, number one, maybe somewhere buried in naval records there's some inquiry about doing that very thing. However, the fact is, to my knowledge, correct me if I'm wrong, the United States never made any kind of artillery shell for the 16-inch 45 or 16-inch 50 that was equal to what the Japanese did. Number two, when you've got a battleship, specifically, let's just say Iowa, with I don't know, 10 gazillion barrels of anti-aircraft firepower on it, you don't need those 16 inchers, baby. And when you have a cap that can reach out over 100 miles, that's not necessary.
Yeah.
But
I too am unaware of any discussion or even preliminary engineering studies to look at something like that. So, but that's not really my area of specialty.
Yeah, many of the gun shields on anti-aircraft platforms had the expression "lead, damn it, lead" painted on the gun shield, right? Because you
hard to do that with a 2.5 degree per second, traverse on a.
That's where I'm going.
Not to be precise
45 minutes in advance before the plane shows up, and you got to start leading 45 minutes.
45 minutes in advance. Hey, guys, start moving it now. They're going to be here in an hour.
Exactly. Anyway. All right. Why are my answers funny? Go ahead.
All right. Thank you for taking my question. On the Pearl Harbor attack show, it was inferred that the Japanese mini-sub entering the harbor were likely not expected to make it out, but you did not explain the reasons for this. Why would these submarines expect difficulty in safely landing the harbor after delivering their torpedoes? Thank you, John H.
Well, first of all, they have no means of returning to the mother sub. So you're in Hawaii for the duration in either a POW or a KIA capacity, you pick. And I have, obviously there's that ongoing debate about whether or not one of the mini subs actually did take pot shots. We do know that one of them made it in far enough for the Monahan to ram her and sink her. Did they ram it, or am I just imagining that?
No, I think they rammed it. Yeah,
they did. They dropped a depth charge on her and rammed her. Yes.
Okay. So
and that was the only one commanded by a lieutenant. He was the instructor for the other midget submarine pilots. And so, as somebody who's transited in and out of that harbor over 100 times, no exaggeration, it's a difficult maneuver to get in and out. There's a lot of turns. You got to crawl carefully in. At least one did. Maybe the second did, Park Stevenson. And so the question then is, could they have gotten out after the attack started with all those American ships running out of the harbor? And
right.
No. So this was technically not a suicide mission, but they all knew it was a suicide mission.
Yeah. I was going to say, I don't think there was any expectation of survival.
Correct.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's why Sakamaki's smiling like he is. It's like, hey, I made it in that POW picture. It's like, hey,
boy. Right.
And that smile meant that he could never return to Japan. I mean, he ended his life. He didn't end his life, but he spent the rest of his life in South America.
Yeah.
How many mini subs were there?
5.
6. 5. That's right. 5.
Yeah.
5. And they were, John, you hit on something. They were all attached to a bigger mother sub that brought them across the Pacific.
Correct.
And dropped them into the harbor, right?
Yeah. So it's and actually you release them well away from the harbor. So then they have to, motor their way in, and the Americans start detecting some of their periscopes around 0430. I think there was a sighting that when you look at the inclusion of the mini subs into the overall attack plan, I'm certainly not the first person to say this. It was a huge mistake because as H.P. Wilmot said in his Pearl Harbor book, the sine qua non of this attack is surprise.
Exactly.
And the mini subs almost blew it for you on 3 separate occasions. I mean, they did blow it. When Ward ends up sinking that one and then sends her report in. It's just to the Americans' discredit that her report was not believed. So anyway,
I did an episode on the midget that landed in Bellows, right, during my Pearl Harbor, Captain Toadie's Pearl Harbor, I think we titled that one. Then I did another one with the tour in Fredericksburg on HA-19. And by the way, that midget was launched by torpedo officer Mosushiro Hashimoto, who was I-58's CO when she sunk Indianapolis.
Right.
So I talk about that a lot too.
Interesting.
Fun facts by Bill Toby.
Right.
The consensus appears to be that maybe Admiral William Halsey was not the best choice to be a fleet admiral in 44 and after. Do you still agree? And if so, who would have been his best replacement? Thanks for the great show. Regards, Paul N. from Custer, South Dakota Cavalry Country.
Okay.
Yeah,
all
I
right.
think all of us are kind of like, yeah, Halsey had passed his prime by 44, and if so, who's his backup?
Mitchell?
I've said this. No, Mitchell's too junior. I think I said this before. October 44, November 44, Halsey's out of his element. And we said this when we did our commander's review or whatever.
Yeah.
But when he gets back into the groove, if you will, he does good things, and again, I point to the South China Sea, the sinkings of those Japanese tankers in the South China Sea. There was more tankers sunk in that one foray than had been sunk in 6 months previous. So, and I mean, that is like a serious dent in their ability. And that's not to say that that's the only thing that he did great. But to me, in the long-term longevity of the war and Japan's already critical fuel status, that's a big
That's
deal.
a big blow.
Does his Curie, and we haven't covered this yet, but we will. The Curie Naval Harbor, was it necessary? No. He did it just because he was like, I want to give the middle finger to the IJN. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So, but do a counterfactual, that the Court of Inquiry after the typhoon is just like, sorry, Bill, you out. Who is his replacement? Who is his
replacement? I don't think it's going to be Mitcher because as we said, he's junior. Do they drag Frank Jack Fletcher back out?
I can't see that.
I don't see that either, but I also don't see them relieving Halsey. But I mean,
Hours?
Mitcher. Oh God, no. Nimitz never. Well, Nimitz might have been like, you know what? Get out.
Yeah, I don't know
because he wanted it. He wanted it. Towers
Yeah.
definitely wanted it. I don't know, man.
I really don't think the seniority issue would have been a factor.
You don't think?
No, I don't. But again, you could be right. I just think from the experience
what about
and
McCain?
the productivity standpoint.
McCain?
I think they're going to do Mitcher before they do McCain. They're going to do Mitcher before they do McCain, I think, because of Mitcher's experience.
Yeah, I guess I would say that they would reach down and pull McCain up and say, here's another star.
That's what I thought. That was my initial thought, was McCain.
I don't know. If they're going to reach down into the bag and either Mitcher or McCain, I think they're going to give it to Mitcher for his experience and his record.
Well, it depends.
To that degree.
If Halsey gets fired after the second typhoon, McCain's gone with him. So
well,
that's a good point.
So it's got to be Mitcher. I mean, just by default.
It's probably Mitcher.
Go ahead.
Mitcher. Okay. Good analysis, guys. You guys.
Hey, wait. Who takes over after Halsey? Because he retires when he gets back to the States. He retires aboard South Dakota. Who takes over Third Fleet?
I'm pretty sure it was Mitcher, but
wasn't Mitcher?
We can do
real-time history.
Hit us with the next question and we'll backfill it.
Yeah. I'll go to the next one. All right. Greetings from cold Montana. I'm trying to keep this short. John Kuhn from Command and General Staff School is on record that the Naval Limitations Treaty were a good thing and that they kept the budgets down from investing in what would have become obsolete equipment. What is you all's view on this? I'm interested and have no formed opinion. Thanks, guys. Great work. You're what history ought to be. First Sergeant Matt S. retired.
Thank you, Matt S. John
sergeant.
Kuhn, I think his book about the Navy General Board does make a pretty convincing case that what the board did was juggle a lot of different potential technology options and basically placed bets on a lot of them to just kind of see where they would go. Um, I I think that hypothesis is fairly credible. I mean, again, to use an analog from 42 in the Mediterranean, one of the things that really hampered the Italian Air Force was the fact that they had been front runners during the late 1930s in avionics and had, or aeronautics, I guess I would say, and invested a lot of money into frontline capacity in the late 1930s. And by the time you get to 1942, is just complete hot trash.
Yeah.
And they no longer, now they're behind the eight ball. And so I kind of think the same analog might have been true here, that as long as you're placing intelligent bets and you're mostly putting your money into R&D rather than production, that ends up doing us good.
I would agree with that. Research and development for sure, because a lot of the aircraft that you're going to see that pop out in 42, and I'm talking, the Hellcat's a bit of an outlier, but I mean, still like the Corsair 1940, they're doing some of these experiments with these things or designs with these things. But point being, ships, if you're talking ships, I'm assuming you're referring to like battleships. The question, what's the gentleman's
Yeah.
first sergeant's name?
Matt.
Matt. I'm assuming Matt is referring to battleships, and I would agree with that because battleships, I mean, it's proven that they were outdated.
Yeah, we could have potentially spent a lot of money on battleships we just didn't need.
Exactly, and because there's a whole class that's killed, that's
Montana.
killed. Yeah, well, I'm talking even before then. There's
Oh, right.
there's a whole class in between West Virginia and the South Dakota that we know, or not South Dakota, North Carolina, that was actually a South Dakota. There was a different
Oh,
South
that's right.
Dakota.
That's
That's
right.
a
That's
whole
right.
class that was killed because of this, because
Yeah.
of these restrictions. And that's part of the reason why Lexington and Saratoga were turned into aircraft carriers.
Also true,
So,
right.
and then
Good
two,
point.
and you get Yorktown. When does Yorktown go on? When is her keel's laid in 35?
Yeah, I think she's commissioned
34, 35?
7 or 38.
Yeah, Enterprise is 38, so Yorktown I think is 37. But regardless of this, they're built, it's a whole new design. So I mean that I would argue that there was still money being spent under the table. We did an episode on Admiral Leahy,
Right.
and Leahy was the guy that was like, we need to build ships and we
Yeah.
need to design ships. He's the guy that pushed through the Iowa class design, South Dakota
Right.
class design.
Right. And God, who was the guy that just wrote that book a few years ago on the interwar naval shipbuilding stuff that was going on? Oh, it's a really good book too. But he makes the point that it was absolutely critical that we be investing in both the Navy yards in their plant and equipment, and we also put tremendous amounts of money into some of the bigger private shipyards to keep them in business during the Great Depression so that they could retain their highly skilled long-term workforce,
Yes.
so that if we get into a war, we've got these dudes and they know how to build ships. So
that was one of the things that Leahy
right.
had a coronary over, is that during the Depression, because we weren't building ships, they had to lay off thousands of
Yes.
skilled workers. And he was like, it's literally the last thing on earth. Are you referring to this book?
No.
Are you referring to this book? Because this is a good one. Okay, well, both of these are good.
I should go down to my basement and try to find it. Anyway, but I can't do that. So anyway, I think there's a lot of room for discussion there, I think, is what we're discovering. Yeah.
Captain Toady, research assistant, reporting, sir. Keel laid of Yorktown in 1934, 21 meg. And the guy who relieved Halsey, Third Fleet Commander, was Vice Admiral Howard Kingman. He kept it for a year until they decommissioned Third Fleet, decommissioning in 1973. And it remained a three-star billet throughout into modern times, right? So he went from 5-star to 3-star, and then boom. Actually, a 4-star, because he wasn't promoted to 5-star until after.
Right.
Real-time history brought to you by Bill Toady.
Tell you what.
It works.
Yeah.
All right. Regarding the Xanthus class repair ship, did I say that right? Xanthus class repair ship. What type of repairs would they perform? Would they do that at sea? My boy Brad's father-in-law served in one, and he just kind of wanted to know if you guys know anything about that ship.
You have stumped the historians. Look at that.
I'll be honest with you.
But the
I
answer-
don't know.
The answer is it would be at anchor.
That I do know.
Yeah, so not
You
at
know,
sea.
it's hanging out in Ulithi or Majuro
Exactly.
or one of those places, and yeah, it's
And they could
Ulithi.
do
Yeah.
amazing work. They had lathes, and they could do forgings and castings, and they're very capable ships.
Yeah.
So to stump you again, Josh from Morgantown, West Virginia, loves the podcast, and he wants to know where Yamashita's gold is. John, do you know what that is?
Yamashita.
Yamashita's gold. Yeah, so just for the sake of our audience, there have been persistent rumors that General Yamashita Tomoyuki, the Tiger of Malaya and also the ultimate defender of the Philippines, sequestered a whole bunch of gold that had been apparently ripped off from Singapore and brought back to the Philippines and yada, yada, yada.
Mhm.
And interestingly enough, I was supposed to be involved on a TV show that had to do with this topic. And I told them straight up, I'm like, I am not endorsing this particular myth. I will be your Japanese talking head, but I'm not, because I don't buy it. If you look at the timing of when that gold was supposed to have been gotten out of Malaya and Singapore, it doesn't really jibe with when Yamashita is actually brought into the Philippines very, very late in the game. He's not put in command there until like just a couple months before the invasion itself. So I just think that's a bunch of malarkey.
If you've ever been to Japan, and I know you have, John, they've got these automated toilets where you walk in and the door spins around and it closes. These are on the street. You can go to the toilet on the street.
Yeah.
That's where the Yamashita's gold was invested
Gold
into that toilet company. Those things came out of nowhere. One day I'm walking down the street, there's a toilet right there. And I take, that is Yamashita's gold.
All
There it
right.
is.
The only explanation.
Hey, well, going back to the repair ship question. So,
Real
sorry.
time. Love it.
Going back to the repair ship. I don't know about the ship that you're referring to. However, the one episode came to mind that we were actually going to talk about it in an episode, and we didn't for I think time's sake. USS Randolph. USS Randolph is hit by a kamikaze while riding at anchor in Ulithi. And she is like, they're predicting her to be out of service for like 5 months and all this other jazz, and she's got to go back to the States because they can't repair her in Pearl Harbor. Well, the captain of Randolph is like, nah, that ain't gonna happen because we just got out here. We're not going back after only been here for a few weeks. They tie up to the repair ship Jason, USS Jason, and they complete repairs to get Randolph back in operation in less than 4 weeks. Right there at Ulithi. And so, I mean, that's a pretty cool little episode right there in terms of repair ships. And yeah, I mean, they yoink one of the elevators out of it. They weld I-beams to where the whatchamacallit, the hangar deck was warped and all this other stuff. They get this bad girl rolling again in just a few weeks. And she's back there at Task Force 58 when she hits, when Spruance takes them to the home islands for the first time. So yeah, the repair ships were vital.
Serious. Yeah.
You mentioned in several episodes that the U.S. heavy cruisers lost their bows in encounters with long lance torpedoes. Was this due to a design defect of the U.S. cruiser? Tom from Danville, Kentucky wants to know.
I think it's a twofold thing. One, the long lance had a big kaboom.
1,080 pounds of kaboom.
It's a lot of kaboom. And then two, and remember, Bill, we were talking about this when we did the petrol stuff, that almost all of them lost their bows in some way, shape, or form, even if they weren't hit in that area. When they go down, the bows just come off like a glass jaw.
Right.
Yeah.
So
And it
I
wasn't
think it
just
was
the heavy
design.
cruisers. Like, there were some light cruisers that lost them too, right?
Yeah. I mean, Helena, did
All right.
Helena lose her bow? Yeah, she did. Yeah, Helena lost her bow, but it's if we're just talking like the New Orleans class heavy cruisers, yeah, they had a glass jaw, and then that was their bow.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, I mean, Indianapolis lost it too, Portland class.
True.
The first torpedo wasn't Longlands. It was in 95, but still.
95 also packed a bit of a wallop. I mean,
It
that's a
did.
quality torpedo as well. So anyway, there you
Kaboom.
go. Kaboom.
John Parshallism.
Yeah,
Kaboom.
that's the technical phrase. A lot of kaboom.
Was there any serious discussion in the use of poison gas during the Pacific campaign? And although it was never used, how high did those discussions rise? This Love the Program, Bob R. wants to know.
Bob R. DM John Greco in his book, Hell to Pay, talks about the fact that if we had invaded Japan, absolutely poison gas is on the table at that point, and atomic weapons as well, used in a tactical sense. So I think that, by the time you get to the end of this war, we're just like, we're getting this sucker over. And certainly we would have contemplated using things like tear gas and other irritant agents, but there were, mustard gas was on the table and all that as well. So that was not discussed earlier in the war, I don't think.
Iwo Jima as well. There was conversation.
Really?
Yeah. There was conversation before we landed on Iwo Jima of just gassing the sucker. And obviously that did not occur, but
yeah. Okay.
So, one of the only episodes, just again, history dork here, one of the only episodes of poison gas in World War II that we know of actually came from an American ship in the European theater. They got hit by a German bomb.
Right. Naples, right? Wasn't it?
I think so. Yeah. I think so.
Yeah. Yep.
Oh, it's funny. I read Hell to Pay. It's an amazing book, right? And I want to say in the book he says that that Marshall signs off on it. Like he signs off that, hey, we got to use it, then use it. So, but it's a great book.
Yeah.
It has been observed by John and others that after Midway, no one in the IJN was removed or demoted. Ukagi Yamato's chief of staff kept a diary and put down an extended entry about the battle and lessons from it. What is your view of the accuracy of his observations, and what else should the IJN have learned from the battle? Kind regards, Martin K.
Great question, Martin K. And I wish I had Ugaki sitting right in front of me, because this is one of those cases where, like, I used to know a lot more about this 20 years ago when Shattered Sword just came out, and now that's 20 years in my rearview mirror. Ugaki does say that he is not without suspicion that there had been a potential compromise of their communications, I seem to recall. I kind of go through that all in Shattered Sword, and I wish that I was as up to speed. Anyway, I've just said that. They didn't learn as many lessons as they ought to have. They really should have taken an in-depth look at their communication security, and they didn't. I think that there's a certain amount of arrogance around the Japanese, just as regards to the security of their language in general, that, outsiders can't really understand it. And certainly if we encode it, we should be fine. They did not give any look-see at their predilection for dispersed operations during their operational planning, I would argue. That said, they did learn some things that you see very quickly introduced into Third Fleet doctrine, which becomes their carrier force immediately after that battle. Fast forward to certainly by Battle of Santa Cruz, they're doing all of their rearming and refueling operations as much as possible actually up on the flight deck, because we don't want to be caught with birds below anymore. That was a bummer. Other things, that come out of that, the use of vanguard forces, that becomes sort of, par for the course for the Japanese for the rest of the war. We're going to see that at the Battle of Philippine Sea as well. So I do think that they learned things at the tactical level. I just don't see that there was a lot of learning at the operational and strategic level, I guess would be my nutshell answer.
I would agree, especially the Navy, not so much the Army, though. The Army, only until the honeycomb defenses that we talk about started, Biak, Peleliu, and Iwo, and to an extent, obviously, Okinawa, does any kind of ground development occur, because you look at Saipan, Tarawa, everything's on the water's edge,
it's very offensive minded.
But China had been going on for quite a while by this point, right?
Yeah.
There's some The one interesting thing I think about is the lesson that they didn't learn. And let me say it this way. They should have been afraid of our submarine force. And Midway, if anything, demonstrated to them that they shouldn't be afraid of our submarine force. And I wonder how that might have affected future operations if they had become afraid of our
So,
Right.
force.
Great point.
Yeah,
so I'm gonna throw this in to your
Sure.
point, Bill. We're talking about the poetic tool, about Ugaki. If you look at the early portions of his diary, he is like on the razor's edge of insanity, worrying about American submarines
Mhm.
because he's constantly putting notes in there. We had a submarine sighting, or there may be
Mhm.
submarines here. So he was
Right.
panicky, which of course means that whole, or at least most of that echelon of the Japanese Navy is also going to be panicky about submarines. And exactly to your point, they would have been really panicky had our submarines actually been able to do
Done something.
anything
Yeah.
in
But,
Yeah.
41,
but that's
42.
always true about submarines. Look at the Falklands, right?
Right.
The sighting of submarines that weren't there shaped the operation more than the sighting of submarines that were there. And that's the wonderful thing about submarines. I love that about us. Um, we can
Yeah.
be in 20 places at once and you just don't know. So I think it's shaping that should have happened, that didn't happen, that actually went in our favor, I think, in the long run.
Hmm.
Anyway.
All right. Got this one for Bill. This is right up your alley. A dude named Shannon wants to know that he loves the podcast. Can you give a brief explanation on the title rank of Commodore and why did the rank Commodore not stick when we have Rear Admiral lower half and Rear Admiral upper half seems so much more confusing? Thanks.
You want it brief? My goodness. Yeah. So
I'm
the
kicking back.
Navy, traditionally, going way back to Royal Navy days, had 9 officer ranks. Okay. It had fewer than that, and then it grew to 9. The ground services, and I'll put Army Air Forces in that mix, had 10. It was just a mismatch, right? So during the war, or it actually started earlier, we decided that we would put a 10th rank, and that would be Commodore. But the Commodores wanted to be called Admiral. They didn't want to be called Commodores. So after the war, that 9th rank was disestablished. And all us Navy guys were happy about that because you would go from wearing eagles on your collar to wearing 2 stars when you got promoted to Rear Admiral. The Army guy, the Army 1-star who outranked you yesterday and is outranked by you today when you get promoted to Rear Admiral, he's not happy about that at all. So the other services ganged up on the Navy in Congress, and Congress forced the Navy to create a rank of a 10th star. And there was all kind of ludicrous
When was this happening? Like
in the early 80s.
early 80s. Okay.
So, yeah, I mean, it was disestablished after World War II, the 1-star rank of Commodore. And in the intervening years from World War II to modern times, Commodore was an 06 who commanded a squadron of ships.
Got it.
It was an honorific title of Commodore, just like you could be a lieutenant commander, CO of a ship called captain, even though you're a lieutenant commander. So if you're a captain in command of a squadron of ships, as I was, you are called Commodore. In the Royal Navy, Commodore is 1-star. In the Royal Australian Navy and the Royal New Zealand Navy. But in the United States Navy, it was you wore your captain's rank while you served as a Commodore. In the early 80s, when Congress got involved and forced the Navy to create a 10th rank, there was a serious effort to call it Commodore Admiral because they wanted to be called Admiral, right? And something Admiral. I wrote an article in Proceedings magazine where I, tongue in cheek, but I tried to make it sound serious, thought that they should be called Admiral Junior Grade. And there was all kind of fury about that because they assumed I was serious, and I was laughing at all this fury. Any case, what the Navy decided, Congress actually forced on the Navy, is they'd still be Rear Admiral, but there would be a difference in pay grade.
Okay.
And so you'd wear 1-star if you're a Rear Admiral. You don't call them Rear Admiral lower half. You still call them Rear Admiral, but they're 1-star Rear Admiral and a pay grade of 07 instead of 08. So that's a long story, but that's the way it happened.
Okay. Always learning.
Right.
Good job, Bill. That was awesome.
Yeah.
All right. Good morning from Germany. Why were the Allies so determined to invade Japan? A blockade certainly helped bring Germany to her knees in World War I. And there are other examples. Wouldn't a Pacific Anaconda be a less costly alternative to an invasion of Kyushu? Thank you and best wishes from my favorite guys in a bar, Peter.
Hey, Peter.
Pete, all right, I got two things, and then I'm going to pass it on to my
Do it.
comrades. Kamikazes, number one.
Mm,
Number two, we were tired of the war. We wanted it over with like yesterday. I'm
yeah.
serious. We wanted it done. We were tired of expending American blood. We were tired of shelling out the cash. Yeah, wars cost money, and you can't just do it if you don't have the money. And we were not that we were going broke by any means, but we were tired of spending the money. The United States populace was ready to get the war over with. A blockade takes, what's that?
Yeah, no, I'm just agreeing with you.
Yeah, and a blockade takes a long time. And as we've said before, Rich Frank said it first on this show, and Sam Cox said it, and you said it, and we've all said it. An invasion, or a blockade rather, is one of the more horrible ways for the Japanese people to end the war because they're going to starve to death.
Yeah.
So that's my answer.
Yeah, I do think that Peter is correct in pointing out that a direct invasion is certainly going to cost a lot more American blood to get this war over with more quickly. That's a valid point. But yeah, the blockade is sort of open-ended in terms of duration. Although with that said, I personally think that the Japanese were going to collapse by the spring of 1946 through, that winter was going to be terrible. Starvation was going to be setting in. The Japanese government, the Big Six, are clearly aware that there was the potential here for domestic unrest if the war continues. And so I don't know how long that blockade ends up lasting, but yeah, to your point, Seth, yeah, it's a terrible way to end this war. It's going to mean millions and millions of Japanese dead through starvation.
Yeah, the only
And they're
thing
mostly
I
going to
can
be
add
children
is,
and the infirm.
from an operational standpoint, Japan ain't Germany. I mean, yeah, we got a huge navy, but the blockade, the coastline, there's so many places you would have to guard. And operationally, it's just really, really difficult. And it would have limited effectiveness. And John's right. I mean, they were starving as it is. And
Yeah.
I'm not sure how much the blockade would have contributed to that.
Yeah.
All right. Mike wants to know, had we implemented the snorkel system in 42 opposed to the 47, do you think it could have shortened the war?
No. Schnorkel, as the Germans might call it, was a wonderful thing, but you can only go about 3 knots on snorkel. So, it allows you to hide while you're recharging to some extent, right? But most of our positioning for approach and attack was done on the surface because you needed the speed. You can't do that snorkeling. So, if you're in denied areas like, west of Taiwan, places like where the bar, yeah,
In the inland sea.
in the inland sea, yeah, there are places where it would have benefited, increased survivability somewhat, maybe, but it's not going to really increase attack effectiveness. And if it doesn't do that, I don't see how it shortens the war.
Yeah, the thing that might have shortened the war is if we had figured out our torpedo problems a hell of a lot earlier. Ding,
Bingo.
ding, ding. Yeah.
X gets the square on that one.
Yeah.
All right. This comes from Jonathan, and we've talked about this in other Q&As, but I wanted, he kind of expounds on this question. I really want to get John's to take the lead a little bit on this. Caruta's center force sailed from Brunel, but came in from the north. Shema's portion of the southern forces sailed from Formosa, but came in from the south. This means both Karuta and Shema's had to sail further to reach their common objective, the Leyte landing beaches. That would have been a case if both had taken a more, what is the case for them to take a more direct route? What operational, tactical, or strategical considerations caused the IGN to do this? Speculation appreciated if facts are not known. Jonathan.
Thank you, Jonathan. Great question. And here's where I wish I could channel my inner Tony Tully on this one, because he's right, that they did take sort of the longer approach. I have to surmise that they wanted to send the main battle force, which is Kurita's battle force, into more open waters. And the only way that you can get there is through San Bernardino, so that you show up off of Samar. Whereas I don't think that they were probably terribly happy with the notion of bringing that force through Surigao, which is much more constricted and much more difficult to operate and maneuver in with a bigger force like the one that Kurita has. So that's my guess as to why they ended up doing that. But you're quite correct that, I don't know if we could actually go and measure that. Would that have cut a day worth of transit, maybe 2 days worth of transit off of both of those battle formations sortie times? It has to be something appreciable, and that might have allowed them to potentially close the jaws when more of the invasion fleet was still unloading closer to the landing beaches at Leyte. Yeah, that's my wild ass guess.
All right. Q&A here. 1,177 service members were lost on the USS Arizona. What time did the attack in Pearl Harbor start, first bomb drop, and when was the USS Arizona hit? During that time span, I'm puzzled as how so many were able to get on board. I assume there's always some kind of skeleton crew when in port, if for nothing else, fire watch. Thanks, Larry S. on the Arizona.
7:55 is when the air raid started,
Yes.
first of all.
Yeah, there's conflict in the sources, though. You see a lot of people say it was 07:48, and I'm actually up on this because I just shot a TV show on this yesterday. But yeah, I think 07:55 makes the most sense to me, because 07:45 is when the first bomb gets dropped on Wheeler, which is a significant distance up.
Middle of the island.
Correct.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
So I say 07:55 seems like, that's when Ford Island gets smacked. But the level bombers don't start coming overhead until the torpedo attack against Battleship Row is starting to wind down, which is around at the 0801, 0802 time frame. And then the level bombers start doing their thing. So I want to say that Arizona was hit at around 0805 or 0806, something like that, because it was the second Vic of 5 aircraft. It's not technically a Vic then, it's a quick that hit her, and that's from Hiryu's group. And yeah, I have to say, I just saw the high def footage. Michael Wenger, who's writing a multi-volume series on this, shared some of these stills with me just 2 days ago, and my God, there's a 7-second delay from when the bomb actually hits. On one of these frames, you can see the water spout of a near miss against Arizona.
Wow.
It takes a little while for the detonation to, start cooking off the powder rooms. But you can actually see in this footage that once the blast starts being vented out the front, on right in front of turret number 1, the whole front superstructure of that ship gets yoinked up by like 30 feet. It's the most incredible, frame by frame thing. You can actually see this happening. Her hull is bent like a banana as she's being yoinked up. The majority of her crew was on the ship. There would have been, several, score that were off on Liberty, whatever, the night before, but the majority of the crew is going to be there. And by the time you get to, the middle of that sequence, probably 1,000 of those crew members have, been killed right there in a heartbeat,
Right.
which is
Yeah.
horrific.
There's a bit of a misconception with the question, though. See, it is true that watch sections, it's called, right, is generally 1 in 5 in port for surface ships, submarines 1 in 3. So a third of the crew would be on board a submarine when you're in port, a fifth of the crew. And these guys didn't have any place to sleep. So they would come home to the ship to sleep. So on most of these ships, unless they were lucky that night, they're on board the ship. And by the way, that 1 in 5 can be modified by the CO. If they're not at a heightened state of readiness, that's a whole nother topic. We could talk about that. We've talked about that.
Yeah.
If they're not at a heightened state of readiness, it's up to the CO to decide how many of his crew members should be on board. at all times to man guns and things like that. So
Right.
I don't think that it's true that that many crew members were on board every one of the ships in port that night, but they just came back to sleep.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah,
so
point.
the battleships were actually due to leave within what 24 to 36 hours before they attacked, the next day, essentially. They were set to leave, specifically Arizona was going to go home the next day. So the fact that what you said, Bill, the captain wanted a lot of the crew aboard because they're leaving the next day. And that's not the same for all the battleships. Like Pennsylvania was in dry dock. So I mean, yeah, she had crew, but most of her crew was not there. A lot of the other battleships were set out to get out. They'd come into Pearl to refuel and rearm, and they were going out to do more maneuvers the following day. And they had the majority of their crews aboard. So that's why Arizona's crew was mostly there. I forget what her crew complement was, but it was
1,500 some.
1,500 guys. Yeah. So,
Yeah.
Crazy.
Yeah.
anyway,
Dear
that's
gentlemen, first, great news that you are not shutting down anytime soon. My question is, can you discuss the logistics of the U.S. Navy in the Pacific theater? Specifically, who did the planning for the organizing the convoys movement? Was there a special training for this at the academy? Best for joyful holidays, Thomas W.
Thank you, Thomas. I'm batting that to Bill. Come on, there's got to be.
So the answer to the academy question is no. Academy, you learn unit level stuff, right? Not fleet level stuff. So you don't become a fleet navigator until later in your career. So there's special staffs for what's called movement, right? Deployment, and special sets of messages that are written for formations and things like that. That's a separate question in logistics. Fleet movements are handled by the admiral's staff and the fleet navigator and things like that. Ashore as well. So, for example, movement between the Marianas and Leyte later in the war, that was all handled in Guam. And there's a special staff to do that. Logistics are handled by what we nowadays call the N4. It wasn't called that back then. But that is mostly populated by supply officers, not line officers for movement. And they would there's a whole pipeline of supply people, officers, as well as enlisted, that handled nothing but food. Another pipeline that handled nothing but spare parts. And then there were engineering officers that handled nothing but maintenance, repair, things like that, dry docks. So each of these was a subspecialty. The supply folks were, I'm thinking, they were line officers who specialized in supply in those days. Now, supply officers are a separate community, not line officers. But they would specialize in this stuff fairly early in their career. And same thing with maintenance. Those were line officers who just went down a maintenance track. Now we have engineering duty officers that do that. So they're a special community. EDO will not command a ship. A supply officer will not command a ship. But in those days, they were line officers just like I was.
Right.
So as far as the logistics train is concerned in the Pacific, there were no convoys like you think in the Atlantic for multiple reasons, not the least of which is we didn't need to do that in the Pacific because the Japanese submarines were most certainly not the Kriegsmarine. They were not the U-boats prowling the gray wolves of the Atlantic, not even anywhere close. And a lot of the logistical maneuvering done into the Pacific was actually done by civilian merchant vessels. And yes, this is merchant marine to an extent, but it was also like, I'm just making this up, Exxon or whatever, Esso in those days, moving, fuel, oil, food, whatever, is going to be moved to a logistical stopping point, let's just say in 44 Ulithi or Majuro or whatever the hell. And at that point, it gets dumped over to military transport vessels. And then they take them to the fleet or Leyte
more
or
exposed. Yeah, potentially. Yeah.
Correct.
And I've always had a
it was like a bucket brigade is a better way to put it.
Right. Even if you postulate that the Japanese Navy had boats that were better for anti-commerce work, like a Type 9C or something like that, the Pacific is just so much bigger a pond, and the concentration of shipping so much more diluted that I really don't know that that would have been an effective overall strategy for the Japanese.
I don't know, man, because I mean, if you look at
There are choke
42.
points, I guess, but
Yeah, I mean, if you look at 42, I mean, look at where we're operating out of. You're operating out of Pearl Harbor and eventually, obviously, Guadalcanal. But I mean, you got Noumea, Espirito Santo, in Australia. So, I mean, yeah, there's a lot of water there for sure. But I mean, we know the Japanese knew where the things were running to and fro. I've always said that the Japanese submarine force was vastly underutilized because they were going after warships. They weren't going after commerce vessels, as opposed to what we were doing. Yeah, we'd sink a warship if we saw one.
yeah,
But that's not what Barb was out there to do. They were out there to sink tankers and troop ships.
Yep.
yeah.
Japanese
Although
were out there trying to sink cruisers.
I was just going to say that before I hand it to Bill, because I know he wants to talk, that Rich Frank has impressed upon me that actually in 42, the Japanese submarine force was pretty damned effective. They sank the Wasp, they
Sure.
sent North Carolina back to the shop, they
Mhm.
continually had Saratoga in the shop. So, anyway, interesting question though.
But there again, look where they hit those guys.
All in,
Saratoga's hit in January of 42 right off of Pearl Harbor, where we're operating.
right
Wasp is sunk and North
in
Carolina's hit
Torpedo
in the
Alley.
same in Torpedo Alley. Juneau sunk in Torpedo Alley. It's all in a known operating area. So I mean, it's not like they didn't know where the hell we were going.
Yeah,
They just weren't,
that wasn't their
they,
doctrine.
yeah, they weren't going after the troop ships or the convoy or the
Right.
cargo ships or whatever.
So,
Anyway,
so the subs act basically as screening vessels for the Japanese Navy.
And in
Their,
some
their
cases,
original, their
resupply.
original. I'm
Yeah.
sorry.
No, I was going to say, in some cases, resupply vessels
Yeah.
as well.
I mean, by
Go
the
ahead.
later point in the war, yeah, they're running a lot of supplies on their
Mhm.
submarines. The original battle doctrine for the Japanese, of course, gave their submarines an allotted share of Kantai-Kessen, the decisive sea battle, that those submarines were supposed to be at the vanguard of the battle force, and they were supposed to be sinking enemy warships to attrit the American battle line so that when the final climactic, battle is commenced, that there will be fewer battleships on our side of the pond. Um, so the result of that is that their boats then are big, they're pretty fast, they're very long ranged, they're terrible from a tactical standpoint of they're slow to dive, they're unwieldy when they are underwater, they have a relatively shallow diving depth. And so, when our anti-submarine forces in 1944, who have now had the benefit of 2 years worth of experience out in the Atlantic Ocean, fighting the best submarines in the world, now transfer that knowledge to the Pacific and are using those same tactics and techniques against slow, clumsy, shallow diving Japanese boats. It's a slaughter.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So it's basically a warship
Yeah.
versus a
An anti-commerce.
commerce raider, which we were doing.
That's exactly right. Yep.
All right. Daryl asks, I love short questions. They get me excited. It's been another fantastic season and I tune in every Tuesday religiously. My question is to be offered. Do you think the flight into darkness was worth it?
no,
No.
I do not.
Short answer.
All right. Next question.
No, and we can expound on that, and I think we did. Is that was it worth it? No, because what do we get out of it? We sink one carrier, and we lose a lot of airplanes. And thank God, most of our guys are recovered.
Yes.
Within a 72-hour period, most of our people are picked up out of the water, if not within less than 24 hours. We lose a lot of airplanes, and we can cover. Go ahead.
How many airplanes? I'm trying to remember off
I
the
don't
top.
remember. I'd have to look at my damn notes. It was over 100.
Yeah, for sinking one aircraft carrier.
For
That's
one
a pretty,
aircraft carrier,
yeah,
and
that's a pretty heavy bill.
that's a very heavy bill. And I mean, again, we could spare the aircraft, and we get the guys back, most of them, but in terms of net result,
Right. Kind of not. Yeah.
do I think it was the right decision? I don't know. So I mean, I side with Mitcher because Mitcher's like, I got these people. If I don't hit them now, they're going to get away. but he doesn't get anything out of it.
that.
Yeah, he's going to launch, but he doesn't get anything out. Well, he doesn't. Let me rephrase that. He
Not
doesn't
good.
get the appreciable return on his investment.
Yeah, commensurate returns. Yep, fair enough.
That's great.
Bill, what do you
Bill,
think?
what do you got?
I agree. I mean,
All right.
you think of it, it's an aircraft carrier's worth of airplanes that we lost trying to sink an
Sink
aircraft.
one.
Right.
That's very. I didn't think about that, but yeah, you're
it's
right.
It's equal. It's even.
Yeah, you're right.
Brett B wants to know, was there any rear seat aces, guys in rears of
Oh, yeah.
torpedoes or dive bombers with 5 more kills?
Yep, absolutely. Yes. Next question. No, there was.
All right.
There were several.
Did you know any, Seth?
I did know one, and I am blanking on his freaking name. My God, I feel terrible. He was Jack Lepla's rear seat gunner with VS2. Oh, he flew with VB10 later. There were several rear seat aces to be, well,
Interesting.
supposed aces. Rear seat gunners and SBDs who shot down more than 5 aircraft. John Snowden is the name that comes to mind, but it's not him. I'm sorry. I'll have to look it up off the top of my head.
We can do real life history when I'll go to the next question.
Yeah.
Wanted to submit a question for the QA that hopefully makes the cut. Eisenhower once wrote, and now is often quoted, that the 5 weapons he considered most crucial in winning the Second World War: the Grand, the bazooka, the 47, the Jeep, and the atomic bomb. I would like to present the same question to the panel, but with the Pacific Edition focus. What 5 weapons or pieces of equipment would you list as the most critical to American success?
John Liska. Sorry.
John Liska.
John Liska. He's not the only one, but he's one of them. He
Okay.
was the man. Sorry.
Love the podcast. I like your excitement, Seth.
Yeah, 5 pieces of Pacific kit that win that war.
Yeah, this is a loyal listener for Michigan, James W. I think it is a phenomenal question.
That's a great question. Yeah,
We can-
absolutely.
I
We
got
can
2.
start with the list
Okay.
that Halsey gave us, right?
Yeah.
And he said the submarine was number 1. And by the way, Richard Frank has the data that proves that the submarines killed more Japanese than the United States Marine Corps.
Mhm.
But that's sink on you. He
No
said
pun
number
intended.
2. I think he said number 2 is the tractor or the bulldozer for building airfields.
Potentially.
Airfields.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I can't remember what the others are because they're unimportant. But go ahead.
No, the bomb is clearly on that list too.
Yes.
So now we're down to 2 other, because I'm with the submarine for
Mhm.
sure.
Mhm.
How can you then not put the carrier though too? I mean,
Yeah.
you have
Well,
to.
Yeah.
100%.
if we're going
Absolutely.
micro
Mhm.
kit, I'm going to say the Gato class boat,
Yep.
specifically the Gato class boat, because they were the
Okay.
first long range,
Mhm.
So
killer.
Mhm.
The SBD, baby, the SBD Dauntless Dive Bomber. That is, I mean, that sinks most Japanese shipping in 1942 is the SBD. Those are my top 2 right there.
I think you
And-
can potentially either put the aerial mine that we dropped during Operation Starvation, or the M67
69, M69.
69, excuse me, incendiary munition. But both of the common denominator there is the B-29.
I was going to say the B-29 is probably one of those 5, right?
Maybe. Yeah,
Mhm.
this is a really interesting question, actually.
Yes, yeah.
Okay. Let's nerd out on this. You have to say the aircraft carrier, yes, but you got to say specifically the Essex class.
Essex
Okay.
class.
Yeah.
Because
Okay.
we're churning those things out. And those, I mean, God knows, everybody knows my
Yes.
love for the Enterprise, but I mean, the Essex class is what carried the war.
How can we not mention one flavor of amphibious landing craft, though? Is it the Higgins boat? Is it
Higgins
the
boat.
LVT? I mean,
I say LVT.
Really.
I go LVT because our ability
Reef.
to do contested, yes, over reef, contested landings against hot LZs, so to speak, is crucial. So yeah, I go LVT over Higgins.
Absolutely. Because if you look at the first 4, 5, 6 waves of any invasion after Tarawa,
Yeah,
they're LVTs. And yeah, obviously there are LCVPs that come later, but they're bringing in the 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th wave, because
Yep.
we've already crossed that reef. We've already established a toehold on the beachhead. So yeah, absolutely the LVT for sure.
the Japanese would tell us that the thing that they were focused on fighting was the
Tanks.
Sherman.
Yeah.
Yeah. That there's a direct quote out of one of the Imperial Japanese Army manuals that says that fighting the Americans means fighting their tanks. And so as a nod to Mr. McManus here, I think you'd have to say too that the Sherman is in that mix. But now we're up to 10 pieces
All
of
right,
kit.
I've got 6. All
Proximity
right.
fuse.
Proximity
Proximity
that's another
fuse.
good one.
Proximity fuse, and then boom, yes,
Yeah.
literally
Yeah.
boom.
If he got the bazooka, we have to have proximity fuse.
Yeah.
I'd say, and I'm gonna put the kibosh on the bazooka. The bazooka was like throwing a tennis ball at a wall if you're shooting at a tiger or a panther with a bazooka. I'm sorry, but anyway, that's
All right,
Yeah,
so
and okay,
this
what do
is
you got,
what
Shawn?
this is what I've got listed. So if you're going to pull one off or take one off, put on. So we've got the Essex class,
Yeah.
right? We can all agree on that, right?
Yeah.
All right, we've got the Gato class.
Gato class boat. Yep.
Got
Yeah.
that. SBD.
See, and I'm back and forth on that one. I'm back. Yeah, I'm here.
How?
Because it's not that important in 1944. I'd rather have
No, but it's important in 42.
Yeah. Anyway.
LVT.
LV2, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
LVT.
I like doing the eye doctor test, right? Is number 1 or number 2? So
Right.
SBT or
LVT.
Number 1 or number 2?
B-29.
9.
Okay.
Oh,
All right.
B-29
If you want to talk airplanes specifically, it's got to be, I'm going to go F6F because they come in 43 and it brings the war all the way home. And by 44,
your move.
45, I'm just adding.
your move.
I
Okay,
didn't. I
is
added.
it SBD or FCX? FCX.
SBD.
Yeah, I go
SBD for me
Hellcat
because
over SBD.
it. I go SBD because it does all the killing in 42.
Yeah, fair.
Okay. I've got about 10 here, but
Okay.
great question.
Great
Excellent
question.
Excellent question.
So good.
All right.
David
M.
MacArthur,
David
number 11. Sorry.
No.
MacArthur, number 11.
Let it go, Bill. Let it go.
The essential ingredient to victory. Douglas MacArthur. Yeah. Okay. Hit us,
All
Shawn.
right. Or what is the procedure decided where a serviceman KIA was buried? My dad's brother was a private named John Moore who was killed in Attu in 43. He was buried in Little Falls Cemetery in Attu. Sometime later, when who knows, his body was disturbed and sent to White Deer, Texas, where I grew up. I was never told how this happened or who decided it. If a man is buried on Okinawa or Arlington, or if the body is sent home, who makes that decision? David M. wants to know.
Okay, easy answer on that. So when the serviceman is killed, especially ashore, or they die or expire ashore, they are buried where they die. They are buried on Guadalcanal or Taro or whatever the case may be.
Yep.
After the war, 1946, I think, 46 or 47, the families of the deceased got the option to bring their boys home. Some of them did, some of them did not. And that's why, World War II veterans who were killed on Taro are buried up the road in Hattiesburg or whatever the case may be. The families wanted to bring their boys home and bury them in the family plot, which is obviously completely understandable. And some families decided leave him there with his, brothers in arms.
And then those cemeteries were then consolidated. There's a big one in the Philippines, and obviously the Punch Bowl in Hawaii. And so, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's KIAs from Iwo Jima in the Punch Bowl. So
Sure.
And at sea, buried at sea, right? Because
buried at sea.
they can't let the body rot, and so they're buried, and then it's a whole lot easier. This is morbid, macabre. Once they're there's just bones, a whole lot more sanitary to disinter and relocate.
Yeah.
All right, lighten the mood a little bit here. Patrick D wants to know, what are your thoughts on the casting choices for any of the Midway movies?
So I'll jump right in on that. I was laughing when I heard Woody Harrelson would play Nimitz on the last Midway movie. However, he sold it.
I did. Yeah, I liked it.
I thought he did well.
Yeah. He wasn't fond of, but he was good, and
Yeah.
I ended up liking it.
Yeah.
The guy who played Dick Best, I don't know that man. I wouldn't know him if I hit him with my truck. But he was and I mean, I understand that he was being directed on how to act. I knew Dick Best. I admittedly did not know him well, but I knew Dick Best. It was not Dick Best. He
No.
didn't talk like that. He didn't act like that. That
No.
was a piss poor choice. He didn't look like that.
Yeah.
It was a really bad choice. The guy that he had was his buddy in the show, Clarence Dickinson. Wasn't this hayseed, that they show in the movie. He wasn't. He was a CAD grad, just like Dick Best. They were
Yes.
officers and gentlemen. They were not these, Yahoo cowboys that they're
Dick,
showed in this
Dick
movie.
Best was the consummate professional,
Yes.
a bit of an intellectual. I mean, he ends up going and working for Rand Corporation after the war, for crying out
Wow.
loud. So yeah, they make him this sort of gum chewing New
Maverick.
Jersey cow maverick. I'm gonna do a
Yeah.
dead stick landing. I mean, it's just all a bunch of malarkey. And I talked to the guy. It was Tom Walla, I believe, who was one of their script consultants. He's the dude that runs the Battle of Midway Roundtable newsletter,
Hmm.
and he told me that he tried to sort of intercede with the director on that casting, or not the casting, but just the characterization of Best in the movie. And the director was like, I have to establish early in the movie that this character is willing to do, be a maverick or whatever. And so the result is that, yeah, the on-screen for the 2019 Midway movie, they just butchered Dick Best as a character. Oh well. Welcome to Hollywood, which brings up a larger point. I mean, when you work in any sort of a TV documentary or a movie production, and I've worked on several at this point, your role as an historian is always damage control. They're gonna botch it somehow. Can
Yep.
you just manage to minimize that and contain it and channelize it? Because that's all you're gonna be able to do.
Masters of the air. What? Sorry.
What? Somebody say something. How about the older one? Any positives or negatives off the older Midway?
We talked
Charlton
about
Heston was a great no.
yeah, you like that, yeah. We talked about that length in our World War II movie episode, and I said that I liked the 2019 movie better, and I got a lot of heat for that. But there's all this unnecessary racial tension, melodrama in
Yeah.
the old one that just really soured it for me.
Mm-hmm.
The 76, the best character in there is Henry Fonda, because it's freaking Henry
Absolutely.
Fonda. It's
Yeah.
Henry Fonda. I don't care if he's playing, a blue jacket. It's Henry Fonda. I mean, come on.
Yep.
Right.
Cool.
Fair enough.
Who was a World War II veteran, by the way.
Mhm.
Good point.
Anyway,
All right. Stan H wants to know, you have spoken often about the decision to rotate Navy's most experienced aviators back to the United States after Midway so they could train the next generation of pilots. Do you know whose idea that was and who made that command decision to implement it?
Oh, it was made at really high levels, but I think Tower had his hands.
I was
in
going
that.
to say it's Towers,
Yeah.
if anybody.
Yeah.
Yeah. Agreed.
And it's the right level. It should be made at that level, and it was game changing for us.
Yeah. Great decision.
All right.
Was it yeah, it would have been Towers.
Mhm.
Yeah. No, you're right, Bill. I was just thinking of something else. Sorry.
The show is the highlight of my week. 2 or 3 dudes sitting around having a beer, discussing something that clearly is to be savored. The enthusiasm is palpable. Question: would the war have ended sooner if we had a torpedo that actually worked from the beginning? Chris in Chicago.
Bill, that's all
Yes.
you.
Yes, and I'm not trying to say that unenthusiastically, but I mean that. Is there anything more to say?
Yeah.
We would have sunk so many ships in the first 2 years of the war that
Damn.
kind of laughing at us, and we
Yeah.
lost we lost 52 submarines. Have I said that today yet? During the war, and I had the math downstairs. I should have been smart enough to bring it upstairs. I'm estimating that 10 of those losses could have been avoided had we had effective weapons. So.
Yeah.
And it's
Yeah,
not just.
was good, Seth.
I was going to say it's not just submarines either. If the torpedoes work, I mean, You know,
Yep.
surface
Airdrop
ships too.
torpedoes.
yeah. Do we get a couple
torpedoes.
of hits on Shikaku at Coral Sea with torpedoes? You know,
Right. Yeah.
who
Yeah.
knows?
The answer is definitely. All right.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for the amazing podcast. If you could go back as an observer with the ability to understand Japanese if needed, what event during the Second World War in the Pacific would you want to witness firsthand? Thanks, Brendan O.
For me it's the dive bomber attack at Midway. There's still I just want to see where all those planes were, and I want to understand what the formation of Kido Butai was at that moment. I think that Tony and I have come up with the best general reconstruction of that formation at the moment of that attack, but it's still a guess. And I think that's a thing that all historians wish for, is that I could, if I had a time machine, could just
Visual
go,
evidence.
yeah, I would love to be sitting in a weather balloon at 10,000 feet, just kind of watching all this go down. That would have been amazing.
Yeah. No,
By
either
the way,
that. Go ahead, Bill.
Where's Kitty Butai today? John?
Kitty Butai is probably down in the basement, and their lazy butts sitting on their favorite chairs, snuggled up and just disgusting. And yeah, that's where they are.
Sorry. Go
I'd
ahead.
have to say that yeah, the 1022 hour June 442, and I'd like to have a pair of night vision goggles and watch the barroom brawl.
Ooh, another good
Yeah,
one.
baby. That would be.
Yeah, because
You just changed my answer, Seth.
It's a zoo,
Yeah.
man. It's a
It's a
freaking zoo. It's a
zoo.
fur ball going on
Yeah.
the water's surface, man. I'd like
Yeah.
to see what the hell is going on. Where in people going, and how close really were they? You know, I mean,
Right.
Bill, when we did the Laffy episode that aired today,
Mhm.
you know, the first Laffy, there were estimates that the thing got up as close as 20 feet from
Yep.
Hiei. 20 feet,
Yeah.
which
Crazy.
I mean, that is stupid close.
That's nuts. Yeah.
I agree.
But did
Now,
it?
my first answer was I wanted to be one of those guys hanging off a gun on the Wisconsin during the signing ceremony.
Oh, the Missouri, yeah.
Got a great answer.
Missouri.
Yeah.
Yeah, Missouri.
Among other things, because then we could get to the bottom of whether or not Fuchito was actually on that battleship, because he wasn't.
Yeah, he was. So, but I'm with you, Seth. You changed my answer, because how could you miss that show?
Barroom brawl. Yeah, that's a
Barroom
great
brawl.
answer.
Yeah.
And as
I'm
far
sticking
as
with
just
Midway just because, I gotta stick with
no,
Midway.
well, I mean, that would be cool, you know, because I mean, just because there's like no visual evidence of that entire sequence
that
of
whole
events,
sequence.
Yep.
even though there was a photographic airplane that was equipped with Wade.
Yes, and took pictures of
took
Kaga
pictures.
under attack, and those pictures have disappeared, and we don't know where they ended up.
Yeah. They're
Yeah.
gone. I mean, they're God
gone.
knows, you know, they're gone. But then, as far as like a cool factor, Surigao Strait or the battleship fight, again, night vision goggles, just watching that beat down. Go down.
I would take the shoot against Kirishima. I would just, that would be really cool. So
Come on, let's be real. Yeah, kaboom.
Nobody said Pearl Harbor. That would be something. I mean, that's an
it
idea.
would be amazing, but it's also fairly well documented.
I was going to say there's visual evidence of that.
Yeah.
There's a lot of, and I'm not just talking stills. I mean, there's a lot of film footage of the stuff from Japanese archives as well. Which
and Bill didn't say watching MacArthur come ashore.
Yeah, no, I didn't. Can you believe that?
Got footage of that too. There's footage of that there.
All right, Stephen, who actually says Seth, Bill, John, and Shawn. Thank you for including me, Stephen, in the question. Admiral Lee gets criticized by some historians because of his unwillingness to seek a night battle with the Japanese fleet during the Battle of the Philippine Sea. What are your thoughts?
I think he was smart.
Go ahead.
I think he was smart for not doing it for multiple reasons, not the least of which is, and he himself admitted that he had not had the ability to train those ships to operate at night as a task force, as a combat unit. It's a little bit different when your balls are nailed to the table in Guadalcanal and you don't have a choice. But when you have a choice, and you're like, my carriers are going to go out there and beat these guys to a pulp. Why do I need to risk my battleships with guys that, oh, by the way, nobody's giving me a goddamn minute to train these people on how to do this. So no, I don't blame him at all.
My
I'm
guess
just-
is that he felt fairly confident in the abilities of the Washington to handle herself in
Yes.
that sort of an environment, but it's an entirely different thing if you've got 5 other ships that you're supposed to be maneuvering in formation during a night fight.
Oh,
Like-
and by the way, remember the time when he was off Guadalcanal and he had Sodak riding behind him and he couldn't raise her at any time during the friggin' night because, well, A, she shot her own friggin' electricity out. Number
Yeah.
two, Thomas Gatch was not the greatest battleship skipper known to man, but that's neither here nor there. So he's got experience with not having full control of a nighttime nautical engagement.
I'm just trying to get the image of that metaphor out of my mindset, so I'm going on to
Yeah,
those.
Yeah, sorry,
yeah,
man.
I can't
All right.
unsee that.
That's why I'm here.
All right. Ted R asks, he's got 2 questions, so it's two-parter, but it's really good. Using the kamikaze tactics, did the Japanese think they could change the course of the war or win it? So that's the first phase.
I think, yeah, I think that certainly by the time you fast forward to Okinawa, I think that there was a belief on the part of Ugaki that they could potentially smash our invasion fleet by expending multiple thousands of kamikazes in the course of this thing. They certainly, again, talking about the delusional feedback loop, they think it is a more effective tactic than it actually is. So, is that going to be war winning? I don't know, but I think they think that it can potentially change the trajectory of the war or lengthen the war.
Yeah,
I think
change
that's
the
your
course, yes. Win, no.
Okay.
Yeah, I think your second statement there that lengthen the war, and they're trying to lengthen the war so they can negotiate is what it's all about. At least that's my opinion anyway. Ugaki's going to fight no matter what because it's what he was put on Earth to do.
So for you guys, how do you, and this follow-up question is really, really poignant. In Japan, how is the kamikaze viewed today?
Very differently than we view it. When you go to some of these kamikaze museums, it's very touching. I mean, in a lot of cases, we know the names of pretty much every kamikaze aviator that got in a cockpit of an aircraft and when that guy took off and when he didn't come back. We have a lot of their letters home. We have a lot of their poetry. So I think the Japanese in general look at them as not necessarily heroic, but it's a tragedy, that these young men were expended in the course of an unwinnable war, that they were patriots, that they were trying to defend their country. But at the same time, there's also, yes, there's pathos around the pilots themselves, but there's also a degree of, I think, anger that these men were expended in what ends up being sort of a futile manner as well. And feeds into the whole sort of general anti-war sentiment that you see throughout the majority of Japan. So, Bill, you've been
I
there.
would say that when I was there last year, I was honestly I was there to do photography, not to do history. But I had a guide, and I tried raising the issue with him. Obviously, we were doing this podcast when I was there, so it was on my mind, and he essentially refused to talk about it. I mean, we waved off the question, and I think that's what most Japanese would do. I would give them. I would agree that it was tragic. There's no doubt about that. I wouldn't, obviously, but their inability to say the words that we were misled by our own government and it resulted in too many of our people dying. Their inability to say those words reminds me too much of I'm having a senior moment. The tendency for Southern states to deny that the Civil War was about slavery. It feels like that to me, right?
Yeah.
And so that's what it feels like to me, and it's too bad because it means they failed to learn the lessons of the war. The lost cause. That's a lost cause.
Lost
it feels
cause.
like the lost cause to me.
Good answers, guys, on that. Good morning, Seth and Bill. I hope you're doing well. I've read where sailors showered in salt water and rinsed in fresh water during the Second World War. Two questions: is that still done on ships? Also, was the salt water filtered in any way beyond just using screen to keep out the flotsam and jetsam? Take care, George Z.
Go
So
for it, Bill.
I'll go. Yeah. So the answer is it's not still done on ships unless your evaporator breaks, which you hope never happens. And it wasn't done that much in World War II either. We had evaporators in World War II. They didn't always work, and not all ships had them. But when but you would limit. So my wife still laughs at how quickly I could take a shower because the evaporators have a limited capacity, right? And so it was the submarine showers, and this wasn't only done on submarines. When you had evaporators with limited capacity, turn the water on, get wet, turn the water off, lather up, turn the water on, rinse, turn the water off, and you're done. 5 minutes. I could still do that, although I don't turn the water off between anymore. I got plenty of water. But the point is that it was much more common to wash your clothes, believe it or not, in salt water and then rinse them.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, but generally guys it may not be every day. May not, maybe once a week. But when the guys could generally take freshwater showers, even in World War II.
It was the bigger ships that had that. Yeah, I mean, if you read Fahey's diary, or that's what you want to call it. He's aboard Montpelier, which is a Cleveland class light cruiser. It's a big ship. We're taking salt water. They were taking saltwater showers, and it was not daily. It was like, every couple of days they're taking saltwater showers because they're operating all the damn time. When they're ashore or when they're in port, yeah, because they can take fresh water or whatever the case might be because they're not doing anything. You know what I mean? And
Right.
there's more time for that kind of stuff.
Okay.
But anyway.
Was Halsey justified in relieving Captain Hoover of his command of the USS Helena? Thanks, William.
Did he relieve him? Yeah, he did. That's right. He did.
Was he
justified?
No. So this is proof, folks.
I'm gonna say no. I'm gonna say no because, and I might get flack for this, but I don't care. I'm gonna say no because of the situation as it was. Did it suck? Yes. Was it the wrong call? Yes.
Yes.
But was Gilbert Hoover being shuffled off to the nether regions the right call? Probably no. I'm going to say no, because Hoover was a combat commander with a lot of experience, and his crew loved him to death, and he was well respected within the community. He was the officer in charge at that moment because Callahan and Scott were dead.
We're dead.
So he's the senior officer. He's the task force commander. And his priority at that point after Juneau goes up is to get the hell out of there because I've got wounded ships, some of them severely, i.e. San Francisco, and I need to get out of here. And the only destroyer that I have right now that can conduct any kind of ASW is the Fletcher. And by the way, that's the only destroyer that I have that's worth a damn with me right now. And I need her to protect what's left of here, not hunt down a sub. I think morally, is it wrong? But morally it is wrong. But is Halsey justified in it? I say no.
The fact that nobody went back to look for survivors just sticks in my craw.
The fact that Hoover waited to send the message, yes, that was crap. That was him. That was
and the fact that he didn't follow up. People, ships sunk, people in the water. You follow up until you know something's been done. It was unconscionable for him to just say, "I sent my message. I'm done. My duty's done.
Yeah.
My responsibility is over." No, you don't do that with people when a ship is sunk. People in the water. You make sure somebody's doing something about it. You escalate. I'm not buying it. We rarely disagree, Seth.
Yeah.
But I think I disagree with you on this one.
I just think at this time of the war, November 1942, when you don't know how much, when you're already down commanders, you need people that are combat proven, that are good at what they do, and are good leaders of men. And he was all three of those things. And you just lost your two your two senior officers in the same fight, at the same damn time. You need all the guns you can get. And I just think if he wants to relieve them, don't do it then. But well, such as it is.
Mhm.
Bill, you touched on something that I forgot to mention at the beginning. You guys, I didn't give any of you guys these questions. These are all last time you kind of got to review them a little bit. So just for the audience, nobody's seen these questions but me. So
Yeah.
looking at, yeah, I know you love it.
Yeah, I love it.
Look,
The answers might be better, but go ahead.
No.
it's better off the hip.
Yeah.
Looking at the dual drive strategy in the Pacific, the Central Pacific thrust and the Southern drive, I can't help but wonder if the division of resources and focus was a strategical misstep. Do you think the war could have concluded more quickly with fewer casualties if the U.S. had a concentrated efforts at a single unified drive? Hugh C., excellent question.
Great question. I love the twin drive.
Mm.
And the reason I love it is because it constantly keeps the Japanese wrong
Diverts their forces.
where we're gonna hit them next. And you see that over and over again, like the beginning of the Battle of Phil C when we go into Biak and they're like, okay, it's got to be down here. And it's like, psych, we're in the Marianas. So I'm a huge fan of the dual drive approach. Yeah, that's where I'm at.
The Navy was always going to proceed with their pre-war plan of War Plan Orange. That was their boilerplate plan on how to defeat Japan. And obviously things change here and there. And
we have been improvising in 42. I mean, the fact that King is willing to yoink us all the way down and fight a battle in the Solomons, which was, most people couldn't have found on the map, that was a tremendous improv move on. You really called an audible there.
Most people still can't.
but that Central Pacific drive that starts in Tarawa and goes to the Marshalls and then goes to the Marianas and then that's all
that's very much textbook. Yeah, I get it.
Pre-war plan, and they were always going to do that. Yeah, I mean Solomon Islands, Guadalcanal, that was a knee jerk and obviously the right call. But as far as the dual drive is concerned, yeah, I think to your point exactly, it diverts the Japanese forces. It doesn't allow them to pile people. I mean, towards the end of the campaign, too, towards 44, they kind of got a pretty good idea where the hell we're going. I mean, they know we're going to Okinawa.
Right.
They got a pretty good idea we're going to go to Iwo Jima.
Well, that's because, the
net is
converging at this point. Right.
The net is closing and it plays a very significant role. Does the diversion of resources have anything to do? No, I don't think so at all, because by the time Mac hits the Philippines in 44, his army is only second in size. His group of armies is only second in size to Eisenhower. So I don't have enough people. It's a bunch of crap. He had more people than he needed, number one. And number two, going on at, just a month before is Peleliu. And we got, Task Force 58 is ranging off of Peleliu and supporting the Philippine operation at the same time. So no, we had plenty of stuff.
By the way, he said it just like that, Seth.
That's just how he said it.
There's an old saying, better to be lucky than good, right? Yeah, the dual drive strategy worked. But my goodness, the right way to do it is to have an actual strategy where where you're coordinating the two drives and you're hitting them with the right, then the left, then the right, and the left. But what you got here is a boxer who with two brains, one brain in his right hand, one brain in his left hand, and his right hand brain punches his right hand whenever it wants to, and his left hand brain does the jabs whenever it wants to, and sometimes they're hitting each other. So it worked out, but I think there's a very large chance that it might not have. I'm with you, John, though. I agree that it turned out really, really well.
Okay.
Okay. Todd said, hey guys, I'm not sure if I'm too late with this one, but I'm wondering why we went with wooden decks on our carriers versus the Brits going with steel. You guys had talked about this on a podcast recently. Please disregard if I've already asked, but love the channel. Keep up the fantastic work, Todd. So just touch on that wooden versus steel decks. Where did that come from? How did it come? Why?
The bottom line is that an aircraft carrier is a power projection asset, and it's got to have a big air wing, and you can't do that if you put an armored deck on your carrier because it puts too much weight in the top side of the ship, and that means that you end up with a smaller hangar space and blah blah blah, and the result is a smaller air wing. So I absolutely fully admit that the Essex was an inferior vessel from a damage protection standpoint versus the Kamakazi in particular to something like the Indomitable. But I absolutely think that the Essex was the right weapon for this war in terms of power projection and actually winning the war.
If your goal is to smother the Japanese with aerial supremacy,
Gotta have
the
planes.
Essex class and Enterprise to an extent are the weapon of choice, because when you can throw up 90 to 100 birds per carrier,
Yeah.
and you've got, I don't know, like 7, 8, 9, 10 of these damn things, not even counting the CVLs.
Yep.
I mean,
That's
all
how you
day
go.
long, brother.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Hey, I'm kind of proud of my each fist has its own brain metaphor.
I don't know. I mean, I agree, but you know, I mean, if you look at 43, just 43,
Mhm.
you know, Mac has got plenty of assets down in
Agreed.
New Guinea. You know, he's got. Does he have the necessary assets to invade the Philippines from 43? No. But does he have the necessary assets to do what he needs to do in New Guinea? Hell yeah. But in spades. And then, oh, and by the way, at the same time, you know, you just look at November 1943 alone. You got Tarawa going down. You got the Rabaul carrier raids going down. You got Bougainville going down. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff going on at the same time. You know, I think there's a misconception. You look at 1943 in the Pacific and you think there's a lull. No,
No.
most certainly is not a lull. It
Agreed.
might not be as furious and fast as 44, because it isn't, but there's certainly no lull in 1943 in the Pacific. I don't think anyway. And geez, good God, just especially towards the second half of the year.
Mhm.
There's so much going down in 43 in the Pacific. It's insane.
All right. What is each of your guys' favorite battle in the Pacific and why? John B.
Great question, John B. Battle of Midway next.
Shattered Sword. Check it out. I
That's
even wrote
mine.
it up.
It's not a battle, it's a campaign. It's Guadalcanal
Mm.
for me.
Close second for me.
It's not a battle, it's a campaign. It's the submarine campaign.
Yeah, no, that's obvious.
Great answer.
All
And
right.
for me, it's Imfall. Tune in. CBI.
There you go.
Yeah, of course.
Fair enough.
Dark horse there, if there ever was
Yeah.
one.
Yeah. All right. Hello. 2 questions. Which island or area do you feel that the U.S. should have invaded during the war?
Should have invaded?
Yeah,
Should, and we know Bill's going to say Formosa.
Yeah, clearly
Should have invaded.
should have.
Goodness gracious. I know where we shouldn't have. That's obvious, but
Starts with a P.
yeah, and it rhymes with Lulu. But
Yeah. I don't
The
have
British
a-
singer,
know.
Lulu.
I don't have a credible answer to that.
I think we
Yeah.
hit every place we needed to hit. I mean,
I agree.
honestly.
I agree. Yeah.
Okay. Well, then how about this? Which naval ship that was on the drawing board did you wish they would have built?
The Montana class, because who doesn't like a good, big, badass battleship?
Mm.
I mean, come on, man.
No, that's a
that would
badass-
be
some badass ship,
slick looking. And one of them would have been USS Louisiana. So I mean, yeah.
There you go. For
Yeah.
us.
USS Big Sky. I love it.
Okay.
Yeah.
All
That's
right.
that's just me. I mean, I don't know, but what about you,
John,
guys?
do you have anything?
No, I don't. I got nothing.
Was there not a sub on the drawing
Yeah,
board?
the Nautilus. We'll put that on the list 10 years later. But go ahead.
Okay. There
Oh,
you
the
go.
Nuki boat. Yeah.
Now we're sort of venturing into what if Napoleon had had a B-52 at the Battle of Waterloo territory. But,
Hey, it's a reasonable hyperbole.
yeah.
Yeah. All right. Gentlemen, to what extent did the Japanese utilize their occupied territories, such as China, Korea, Southeast Asia, Indochina, to manufacture ships, planes, war materials? Randall from Elliott City, Maryland. Did we use any territory? Did they use territory for that?
Great question. And the short answer is no. That if you want to look, and I talk about this fairly extensively in my 1942 tome. If you want to talk about a mismanagement of an economic area to the disadvantage of your larger empire, look no further than how the Japanese managed Southeast Asia, because it's a dumpster fire. They destroyed those economies, they ran them into the ground, and they contributed essentially nothing to the Japanese war effort. That the contribution of all of those areas together, I think it equates to something like 1.3% of their GDP. It's nothing.
Mm-hmm.
So the first problem is, of course, there's no manufacturing capacity there just to start with, because all of those places were colonies, and all of the former colonial powers were using the standard model, which is the productive capacity is in the home country, and we use your territory for raw
resources,
material, extraction. We just take all your stuff and we turn it into. So there wasn't any factories there to inherit on the part of the Japanese, but they made it even worse than it needed to be, in that, for instance, if you look at the sugar industry in the Philippines, the Japanese already had sugar plantations on Formosa, and so they preferred those plantations to the ones in the Philippines, and so they end up wrecking the agricultural cash crop in the Philippines, and basically tell the Filipino farmers, you need to, plant subsistence farming. We're taking away all your money as a result. The same thing happens in Malaya. The Japanese go in there, they plunder like 150,000 tons worth of rubber and take it back to the home islands. That's all that they ever bring home, because their own auto industry is so small that they can't even use the rubber that they plundered. And so the result then is that the Malayan economy goes into a tailspin because no one's buying their rubber anymore. The Japanese don't need it.
Mm-hmm.
So the same general pattern persists throughout Southeast Asia. And by the end of the war, all of those economies, except for Thailand, have collapsed by 50% or more of their GDP. It's one of the largest economic collapses in recorded human history. And so all of that neck of the woods is just a complete economic basket case by the end of the war. The Japanese were just terrible, terrible managers.
John, I love the fact that you used your MBA in writing a World War II history book.
There you go.
1942. Yeah. Because from a macroeconomic standpoint, what you're saying, I had an epiphany while you were talking. I often have epiphanies when you're talking. Is what you're saying is that they cunningly crafted the worst of all worlds. They enslaved the people, but in electronics, you have amplifiers and loads, right?
Right.
Usually when you have an enslaved people, though, that population becomes an amplifier for your wants and desires. These cunning people, they turn the enslaved people into a load that drag them down even further. So, I mean, this is the first order,
Yes. And more broadly speaking, I mean, you see the same pattern in the Axis nations, particularly Germany. This is all a plunder-based war economy. The Germans do the same thing to themselves in occupied Europe, in that they're not able to harness the industrial power that was available to them in places like France and Czechoslovakia. The Japanese, it's even worse. Part of this, I think, what's going on is that the war was so quickly thrust upon the Japanese. They realize, when the oil embargo goes down in the summer of 41, it's like, uh-oh, we got a problem here. We're probably going to have to go to war. So they hurry up and they throw together this plan of campaign, which turns out to be ultimately very, very successful at the beginning portions of the war. But that meant that there was no time for any sort of civil administrative planning as part of that, which means that they go into these countries explicitly saying that, oh yes, 16th Army that's going to be based here in Java, you're going to have to support yourselves, because we're not going to have enough shipping to bring down basic materials to Java. So you'll just extract it from the local industry as if, light bulbs grow on palm trees. I don't know how that works, but it's just, yeah, it's a dumpster fire from the get-go.
Seth,
Mm.
you guys knocked it out of the park. Great answers, guys. Perfect answers. All right. Sergio M wants to know, I got a question regarding the U.S. Arizona's turret color. How is it 70 years after Pearl Harbor, with all the witnesses, survivors, and post-attack documentations, no one noticed the color was wrong? Can someone explain the mystery of B-39's turret color?
It was
Turret
aliens.
color?
It was aliens.
The tops of her turrets were red.
Yes.
And that was for aerial identification for different battleship squadrons. That's why the tops of her turret, her main battery, was red. And as far as the
see that in the Japanese footage as they're coming over the top, it's differently colored.
Yeah, it's like candy apple red. And then I mean that's not their Navy color, but I mean it is red. And then as far as the ship color is concerned, I actually, ironically enough, looked into this not long ago because I'm a dork, and I wanted to see pre-war or very, very early war Navy ship colors because much like, well, Shawn knows this, I still build model ships on occasion.
Yeah.
And the United States Navy ordered pre-war, like I'm talking spring of 41, for the Navy, all of the ships to start experimenting with different colors of shades of blue to camouflage in the event of a war in the Pacific Ocean. And USS Arizona, to my knowledge, and I'm pretty sure I'm right on this, she was painted what is called 5S sea blue. She was blue. She wasn't dark navy blue like that blue over Bill's shoulder, but she was like a sea blue, kind of a grayish blue color, as were most of the battleships in Pearl Harbor.
Wow.
So that was, nerdery there.
Mm-hmm.
Always learning.
Battleship gray.
Always learning.
Always learning.
See, we learn with the audience.
Yeah.
It's the best
Yeah,
part.
but in all honesty, there are physical documents that say that the United States Navy coming down from, oh hell, who was C&O before King? Oh my God,
it was Stark.
Stark.
Yeah.
So it says, this is what I want you to do, essentially, and the colors were blue.
Yeah.
There's photographs of Enterprise pre-Pearl Harbor, and she's as blue as the day is long, and I mean blue. And like the tops are for her tripod mast is like everybody says it's white. It's not white. It's what they call 5L. It's a light gray, and almost white, but it's gray. And that's the same thing at Pearl Harbor. They were sea blue with like a light gray tripod mast on.
It was pretty effective, by the way. And I'm going to play the role of Shawn here and ask a follow-up. So, okay, what's up with this Dazzle paint scheme, Shawn, Seth?
The Dazzle paint scheme that comes out in 44.
43, isn't it? But
43 or 44. Yeah. That was done to disguise the direction and the shape of the ship. It was never meant to camouflage. You're never going to camouflage a freaking heavy cruiser. I'm sorry. It's not going to happen. You're going to see an 800-foot vessel. It's just the way it is. It was designed, Bill, to throw off submarine
angle on the bow. There's angle on the bow.
It was done in World War I too. Actually, the Brits did it first.
Yep. It did, yep. And it was pretty
crazy looking patterns too.
But
there's a reason that the U.S. Navy was called the Big Blue Fleet, or rather the Task Force 58, because ships in 42, 43 were blue. They were blue.
Yep.
And then in 43 they started doing the dazzle paint, camouflage stuff. And then 44, 45 they went back to blue because they realized it was far more effective trying to hide an aircraft carrier if it's blue in the blue Pacific as opposed to 3 different shades of gray.
Right.
Anyway, way more than you needed to know.
All you need to know about colors of ships. I love your podcast. You guys have done an excellent job shedding light on so many aspects of the Pacific War that many of us had never heard of or never understood. My question is regards to the U.S. 7th Air Force in 45. P-51 fighter groups from the 7th moved on to Iwo Jima in March of 45, and in April began flying their VLR missions to Japan. Specifically, they were initially tasked with escorting the B-29s. My question is, why were these daylight B-29 missions flown after the enormous success of the night raids onto Tokyo the month before? Were the bombing results of any better, or is this just an excuse to draw the remaining Japanese fighters into battle with the Mustangs? Thanks. That's from Keith, who also wants to know when we're doing the CBI theater. A couple more seasons, buddy. Go ahead, Seth.
Are you Keith?
So what?
Are you Keith,
Are
Shawn?
you Keith,
Is
John?
that your pen name? Go ahead.
I see. Now we know Keith.
Now we know what's going on. So the
good, Bill.
Yeah.
the 51s based off of EWO were, as you said, they were initially put there to escort the B-29s, but when it was abundantly clear that Japanese fighter forces were not going to intercept the B-29s to the degree that the Luftwaffe is over Germany, they were completely unnecessary for that task. Did they still engage them? Yeah, absolutely. But they did not do it to the degree that the 8th and 9th Air Force is doing over Europe. That being said, they did a lot of ground interdiction, which is the same stuff that the 8th and 9th was doing over Europe, is where they're shooting up trains, they're shooting up freaking sampans, dudes walking along the beach. There's gun camera footage of this stuff. And I mean, they're lighting it. If it moves, it's getting shot by those Mustangs. As insofar as why did we continue to bomb during daylight? Why not? Because after that, after Meeting House, March 10th, 1945, Japanese anti-air defenses against high-level or against American strategic bombers was so little, and the further it went on, the more degraded it became. That it was like we could pretty much do whatever the hell we wanted to, whenever we wanted to. So we got the munitions. Why not use them?
Good.
That's a short answer, but I think that's fairly concise.
Awesome. Anybody got anything to add to that? Nope. No. All right. Hi, guys. I've heard Jon Parshall talk about the system when referring to the military structure of the Army and Navy of each side. I would like your opinion on how much better or worse you think the war would have progressed using the same organized command structure we use today than we had when the War Department and Department of the Navy, there was 2 units. Today, they were combined into the Defense Department. Do you think that would have made an overall commander in the Pacific War campaign? Jeff.
Great question. Bill, can you answer that?
Of course I can. John, will it be right? That's another question. So I obviously I'm way for a unified commander, and we would have one today. It would be called Commander-in-Chief, Indo-Pacific Command. And I'm not a fan of the Indo-Pacific, but because I'm a Pacific guy. But I do think that it would be the learning curve would be shorter for the command structure. I actually am less concerned, with. So the answer is I'm trying not to answer the question of how it will go down today, because the thing I'm worried about today are actually the fighting forces, not the command structure.
Right.
In 1945, it took a little while to get up on step. And a lot of Admiral Nimitz's personal willingness to lower his own personal ego for the good of the mission. And if you had a different commander in place at that time who was less willing to do that, I'm not going to name names, it could have gone really badly for us.
Mm-hmm.
So thank God we had Chester Nimitz in that position at that time. And thank FDR. I mean, because again, and thank God he wasn't in that position in 1944 like FDR initially wanted. We've talked about that. So yeah, would today's command structure have benefited our fight in 1945? Probably, if the right commander had been put in charge. But it could have been much worse if the wrong commander had been put in charge. John, over to you.
No, I got nothing on that. I mean, I am very much a fan of looking at big picture systems within the context of a global war as being leading indicators of who's going to win that war. And so, yes, I'm absolutely with you. And you summed it up better than I think I could have. Unified command would be a little better as long as we got the right commander.
Cool. During the Kamakazi episodes, you mentioned percentages of the efficiency of the Japanese attacks. How many Japanese airmen died because of kamikaze attacks compared to how many sailors and Marines died? And did the Japanese look at those numbers and think it was worth it? Thanks. This is Tony from Chico, California.
Great question, Tony. First of all, of course, the Japanese weren't looking at those numbers because their post-battle damage assessment estimates were just completely on Mars, and so they thought they were killing fantastically more numbers of American service personnel than they actually were. That's a fascinating question. I mean, raw, just napkin math. As I'm thinking about this, we lose what, 5,000 sailors KIA as a result of their at Okinawa. They expended nearly 8,000 aircraft to make that happen, and many of those aircraft were multiple aircrew. And so, yeah, they are expending more than one for one in terms of pilot losses, aviator losses to kill those sailors, which makes this a very inefficient way of running a war. Yes, they do a lot of damage to a lot of warships in the process of doing that. But again, tactically speaking, this is a more effective weapon than a conventional naval aviation attack, but it is still not anything that is either operationally or strategic in effect.
Sustainable. Or sustainable.
Or sustainable. Great point.
Seth?
Cool.
He's got it right.
Good to go.
Yeah. No, I'm good.
Okay.
All right. I got a follow-up for you.
Okay.
For John. I asked Seth this the other day. We were talking about it. So let's say Kyushu, they had what left? 7,000 fighters. Does that sound about right?
Aircraft, no, it's actually closer to 9,000, I think, is what the Japanese had in Kyushu.
Okay, so let's say they say, screw it, we're throwing the rest at the fleet. We're going to throw in 9,000.
Right.
That enough with these numbers? That's enough to kind of cripple that fleet and us to take a time out, right?
I don't know, because among other things, they've changed their doctrine. They're not going to be going after a fleet. They're going to be going after our transport
ships.
Yeah. So they're going to go after the troop ships. I think that that's going to be a horrific threat environment for us to be living in. I think that we will do our best to, throw the blue blanket over Kyushu and shoot down as many of those planes inbound as we can, but it's going to be a very tough problem just because so much of it is over land as opposed to over water that we're trying to interdict. I don't have any basis for saying this because my crystal ball isn't big enough, but even that I don't think is going to be sufficient on their part to prevent the Americans from actually putting our troops ashore.
Okay. I think you see, before we land on Kyushu, I think you see an aerial bombing campaign unprecedented in the history of man. I do. I think you think the B-29s are laying waste on the Kanto plain. You ain't seen nothing yet. They're going to burn every freaking thing in sight for weeks on end. Mm-hmm. And it's not just going to be the 29ers either, by the way. It's going to be the 17s and the 24s flying out of Okinawa.
That's right. 8th Air Force will be over there and will be operational at
Absolutely. And it's going to be carrier aircraft doing their thing too. I think you're going to see, are we going to kill all 9,000 plus? Of course not. Nor are they going to throw all 9,000, in like a 2-week period. That's not going to happen. They don't have the resources or the ability to do that physically.
Yeah, but we're going to have birds over that island like it's...
Absolutely. But to your point, John, you start taking hits in troop ships packed with the 1st Marine Division, and instead of losing, 496 guys on Bunker Hill, you lose, I don't know, 3,500 Marines.
Well, I don't think that's going to happen though either, because the majority of those attack transports really are only hauling about a battalion worth of guys.
Yeah, but if you hit 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 of them,
fair. Yeah, what I'm trying to say is you're not going to lose 3,500 as a result of one ship.
Oh, good Lord, no, hell no, no. But I'm thinking, they're not very maneuverable vessels. So it's not like you're hitting Laffy here that's doing this, in the water. No. And if you got a armada of them, you're going to, more than one theoretically is going to get hit. Point being is that you're going to get more of a casualty rate on the United States side, as exactly what you were saying,
Yeah.
But before that ever happens, I think we lay waste to that island where they're still trying to get plants to grow on there now. I'll be honest with you. I think they just burn it to the ground. I really do. I mean, and
Yeah,
LeMay's
of
sitting there
course you.
going, "Oh
Oh, yeah.
yeah."
But of course, from a discrete targeting standpoint, I mean, they're stuffing individual
Yep.
kamikaze
And
into
caves and everything
garages
else.
and
Yeah.
caves and, underneath camouflage netting out in the middle of forests. How are we going to find those things? It's going to be a lot of needles and a lot of haystacks.
Yeah.
I agree that
No.
we're definitely going to be sending it. That the number of aircraft that we would have had over southern Kyushu would have dwarfed what we had in Overlord, and that's saying something.
I agree.
Yeah. John wants to know, did we do the Japanese a favor by killing Yamamoto? Notwithstanding the triumph at Pearl Harbor, he had made some pretty bad decisions, such as brushing off the objectives to his Midway plan and failing to throw everything into the Guadalcanal campaign. Good question, John.
Great question. No, I don't think we did him a favor, because I think if you look at the operational planning undertaken by his successors, both Koga and Toyota, that their operational plans were just as convoluted and ineffective as Yamamoto's had been. And so I tend to think that he was the most competent of their incompetent operational planner admirals. And so taking him off the field is a net gain for us, not for the Japanese.
Well, I mean, just look at what Toyota does towards the end of the war. Yeah, he's one of these hardliners that just keeps throwing men into the meat grinder and doesn't give a damn.
Okay, so there's a sort of an interesting counterfactual to the counterfactual. What ends up happening if Yamamoto lives through the war? He is commander of combined fleet throughout this time, and he ends up being in Toyota's position as Navy head of the Navy. So he would now have been the number 2 guy underneath Admiral Yonai, who was definitely in the peace camp. I think Yamamoto would have been in the pro-peace camp as well towards
I
the end
agree.
of the war. That might have actually gotten it over with. I don't know if it gets it over any sooner, but it certainly means that it becomes a clean Army-Navy break, that you've got a pro-peace Army faction along with the Prime Minister, Suzuki, who's getting into that camp, and Foreign Minister Togo always was in that camp. It would have been 4-2 on the Big Six as opposed to an even split 3-3.
Yeah.
So it means
Anyway.
the war wouldn't have been fought any more effectively or less effectively, but the peace argument might have shifted.
Might have been a little, quicker in coming around. Don't know. Good question, though. Great question.
All right, so John and Seth John and Bill did an excellent job of answering this question last time, and so I'm going to field it for you, John, because me and Seth talked, and we want to get your perspective. Is it fair to say that the performance of the U.S. Navy dive bombers peaked at Midway, and that these aircraft and their pilots never performed nearly as well? Not in the various Guadalcanal battles, not in Leyte, not in Philippine Sea. Dive bombers sank 4 carriers in one day. And later, Japanese fleets had the same or more, if anything, and the subs were more effective. Agree or disagree? So it's TBM 56. He's trying to ask, why is there a downshift in the fighters, bombers attacking carriers?
Yeah, I do think that by that point in the war, really what we're talking about is Phil C, right? Why didn't the dive bombers do better at Phil C? I don't think the Helldiver is as good a plane as the SBD is, actually. But I think, too, that our crews were kind of rusty. We hadn't been doing those sorts of missions at that point. And the other thing, of course, is there just wasn't an availability of targets by the time we finally get airplanes over the Japanese carrier fleet. They've lost 2 of their ships as a result of submarines. We now fly the mission into darkness. We've only got a few carriers available there to hit, and in the event, it's only Hio that they bag, and they bag her with a torpedo plane. So, yeah, I don't know. I haven't got a credible answer to that, Seth.
I'd fall back on what we said at Truk when we did Hailstone, is that these guys had not had
It's reps.
much. Yes, they had not had much, if any, experience attacking moving targets. And it is a big difference between hitting a ship that's tied up in Dublin Harbor than hitting an aircraft carrier or a cruiser or whatever the case may be that's doing this and going around and shooting at you. Not that they weren't in Truk, because they were, but there's a bunch of different variables in there. And there's my old friend Jig Dog Ramage, who plowed a bomb right through one of the ships at Dublin Harbor at Truk, missed Hio at I think it was Hio at Phil C. So I mean, and he was a highly experienced dive bomber pilot, but he had not attacked a carrier before. He'd never even seen one before, an enemy carrier. And I mean, so I think it's exactly it's a lack of reps.
The same is true, though, of course, of Dick Best at Midway. He hadn't seen a Japanese carrier before,
right?
But a guy like that, I forget the amount of stick time he had. It was pretty high. It was like 1,500 hours or something like that. And yeah, I can't help but escape the impression that our early war aviators just had more training under their belt, and a guy like Best and Dusty, those dudes were just consummate pros, and
they were the masters at their craft. They were masters. Same thing with the fighter pilots, and not degrading our fighter pilots late war at all, because I mean, we've stacked the kills. But point being is that these dudes that were flying, like Dusty Cleese, Annapolis class of 38, he immediately went to flight training. Boom.
Right.
And he got his wings in early 1940. So by the time, flying dive bombers, mind you, and didn't fly anything else. So by the time Midway rolls around, that dude had thousands of hours in the cockpit of an SBD. Yeah. And so, I mean, he could literally do everything with his freaking eyes closed. And that's just one guy, So I mean,
what we're saying here is that just better aviators at the beginning of the war. That
more training, and I mean,
training, more reps,
more training, and these guys have been doing. That's the only thing they did.
Right.
That's all they did.
Just to be a little bit more precise, they weren't thrown into the war as quickly because there was a couple of years of peace before they had to fly the combat missions.
Right.
The later pilots, they got trained up by better instructors who had a lot of combat experience, but then they were thrown right into the war.
Exactly. And then you look, we did this couple episodes in the home island raids and things like that when we talked about some in the Yamato raid on Tenichigo, when we're sending in now, our squadron commanders are guys who were at Midway.
Right.
They were or Guadalcanal or whatever the case may be. These are the guys that were sent home in 42 to go train your boys, and now they're coming out with the boys that they trained.
Yep.
And there are guys like we talked about him, Dave Barry, who scores hits all through the early carrier raids, Coral Sea, and then he comes out and he's hitting targets in 45. And again, he hasn't lost that edge.
Right.
He hasn't lost this supremely trained aviator, and he's not the only one, but a supremely trained aviator who is a master at his craft, and he's honed the people behind him to a razor's edge. And now you've got this just incredibly stacked leader bringing all these guys out there, and he performs yet again. And then he's not the only one,
Yeah. Yeah.
So anyway,
I think we should take a last question, and we should wrap this puppy.
I agree.
All right, one more. Let's see. I guess this is an easy one, and it's kind of steers out of this. But Stephen wanted to know. He says you guys have a terrific podcast. I've listened to it from the beginning, and perhaps I've missed it, but do you guys have any sponsor or financial support? I'd love to help out. I'd love to support them. And I think that's a good way to end it. His name's Steven. And I want to say, you guys talked about some things that you guys personally support. So I'll give you kind of to finish up, put a bow on it with that question.
We do not. You're looking at the production team right here. This is it. Bill does the audio stuff, I do the video stuff, and that is it. And we all contribute to the notes and things. And I write the notes, I send them to John, I send them to Bill. Everybody pitches in, and we go. There are no sponsors. We have been approached by sponsors before, and to a group, we've turned them down. And we've turned them down for multiple reasons, not the least of which is I don't want anybody being able to say, you should do this. No,
Right.
we're going to do what we want to do, and we're going to deliver history the way that we want to deliver it. And I'm not saying, yay us, but I mean, that's the truth.
Well,
That's the
and
way it
the other thing
is.
that comes into it too is that yeah, we're doing this because we love it and it's
Yeah.
super fun. I mean,
Yeah.
back to the earlier comment from one of the questions, that Tuesday is the highlight of my week. Filming these things with my friends Seth and Bill is a highlight of my week too. So yeah, thank you to everyone who watches, and we really, really appreciate that.
Agreed.
My sponsor is the United States Navy, who pays me my retirement pay.
Well, technically, mine is the United States Army. So,
But they
Right.
don't
There's
get a
that.
vote on what I say because they're not sponsoring the show.
No.
And they would like to get a vote on some of the things I say. Trust me.
I would
If I
like to.
were unauthorized.
I would like to point out three things. All right. So one, John's got a book coming out, so go buy that for everybody. Two,
In a
Bill-
years.
in 2027, I'm looking for 2026. Bill has a great organization that he belongs to with helping veterans.
Mm.
So that's very important. And Seth, there was a company, they sent you some coffee. Wasn't there some coffee?
Oh,
Gonna
yeah,
mention
yeah.
Old Salt.
Yeah.
Old Salt Coffee Company. Yeah,
they're
they
not
are
sending
not a
us money,
sponsor, but
folks.
they're good dudes. They're just good dudes,
They're
and
just
the
good dudes.
coffee's
They're not
freaking
sending-
amazing.
Nobody's sending us money. So
No.
Don't
No.
tell my wife this, but I ordered her 2 bags and it just came for Christmas.
There you go. There you
She
go.
loves that, but she's
did you
gone.
get the silent service?
I'm not going to disclose that, Bill, because I want us to be
That's
friends.
a no.
The silent
a no.
service is the good stuff.
It is.
Okay,
It's all good.
I'll put
It's
that
all
next
good.
Yeah.
But in all seriousness, yeah, I mean, if you want to donate something to somebody, donate it to museums, donate it to ship museums because they need the money. They all do because there's not a single ship museum. I went to the North Carolina, the thing you could eat off the deck on that thing. Shawn, I know you've been to. You were there the week before I was.
Yep.
But I mean, those museums, they require a lot of money. And yeah, there's a lot of people that go to them depending on where they are, but there's a lot of people that don't go to them depending on where they are either.
Also
And
true.
the maintenance and upkeep on those vessels is freaking nuts, the amount of money. So I see people that belong to the museum ships thing on Facebook, and I see this ship's in deplorable condition. Well, then shut up and donate some cash.
Mhm.
Help them
Right.
out. You want to help out, then help out. That's a good way to help out. Donate to museums like mine, and we can help preserve history because honestly, that's where that money goes. It goes to exhibits and it goes to preservation.
Agree.
So there.
And as far as my ministry goes, Shawn, thank you for mentioning that. It's a veterans ministry, but it's local. It's in Brevard County, Florida. But, what we need more than anything is people rather than money, because that has become an all-consuming job for me. When I'm not doing this podcast, I am doing that. We run it out of Church at Viera, Viera, in Viera, Florida. And, they give us the infrastructure and the support that we need. So if you're moved to donate to them. Thank you for asking.
Thanks, everyone.
Yes.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Kind.
Thank you, Shawn, for being our MC.
Yeah.
Seth, I will turn the back over to you, my man, Seth. I appreciate it. And I am looking forward to several copious drinks with my boys Friday and watching where this goes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you enjoyed this one, tune in to the next couple episodes of the Q&A. We will get back to the war, obviously, but by doing these Q&As, especially when we're doing them now, which is December 17th, and then the next couple we're going to be on December 20th, it's very evident it's around the Christmas holidays. And I'm going to just say for the rest of the crew here that I don't feel like writing about history during the Christmas holidays. So we're doing these. So tune into the next two, especially because they should be pretty fun. So with that, we want to thank you very much for listening and or watching to this episode of the Unauthorized History of the Pacific War podcast. Give us a rating and review if you want to. We appreciate it. If you want to see the video version of this, if you're already not looking at it, look at our YouTube channel. If you've got a question or a comment not to be answered on these next two shows, send us an email at unauthorizedpacificpodcast@gmail.com. Once again, my name is Seth Parrott, and I want to thank you very much for listening and or watching. John, my brother, thanks for being here with us again, as always.
As always. Yep. Thanks.
Shawn, again, thank you very much. And we will see you Well,
See
I
ya.
would say next week, but it's actually going to be in about 3 days. So appreciate it as always. And Bill, my brother, bring us home.
We'll see you again next week.